Okay, folks, we're ready to go. This is, welcome to the October committee meeting of the Omaha Power District Board. Announcement regarding notice of this meeting and time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by mailing such notice to each of the district's directors on April 3rd, 2018. Before we get rolling, Mr. Burke, could you give us the safety?
Sure. We're on the 9th floor on the west side of Energy Plaza. In the event that we have to exit this floor, we would exit in the elevators all the way down to the main level out on the 17th Street side, unless there is a fire, and then we would take the steps, not the elevators. If we go down the steps, we use our three-point touch, one hand on the railing, 2 feet on the ground, all the way down to the main level, out on the 17th Street side of the building. I don't anticipate severe weather, although it's been nasty. But in the event we had to seek shelter, we would actually be escorted to a secure area, hardened area of our first floor area, and so security will escort us there. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor. The AED and the first aid kit is to the right of the elevator, one on top of each other. Is anybody here certified in the use of AED or in CPR? So we have some folks around the room to do that. Let me see who I have here. Mark, would you call 911 in the event that we need it? So thank you very much. I think that concludes our safety briefing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, first committee report will be Finance, Mr. Mines.
Javier. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy to report the financial results as of September 30th. This concludes the third quarter of 2018. An important quarter because it really encompasses the summer months, which are typically our heavy financial months. I'm happy to report that for the month of September, retail revenues were $86.3 million, which is $2.8 million over budget. We had a warmer than usual September, and that's a story behind the strong revenues we received in the month. Off-system sales were $12.6 million, which is $3.9 million over budget. We sold a significant amount of power into the market as well. And other income for September was $2.3 million, which is $3.5 million under budget. The other part of the story, which is really important and something that I mentioned last year and I've been mentioning this year, is on the operating and maintenance expense piece. And for the month of September, O&M expenses were $26.2 million, which is $1.7 million under budget. This year, we haven't seen the same the order of magnitude of savings that we saw last year, because again, we continue to refine our budgets and we keep pushing those budgets down. But still, with our budgets at lower levels than last year, our teams continue to find ways to save money, to be efficient and innovative, and do more with less. And that is reflected in these numbers in September. Fuel and purchase power.
One thing about that, but
yes.
That does not include the decommissioning budget. Is that correct?
Correct. That's separate.
That's another good story. Yeah.
That's a fantastic story. On fuel and purchase power expenses for September, we spent $28.9 million, which was $4.4 million over budget. Just as we sold power into the market, we also bought power from the market. We actually realized quite a bit of savings on fuel. Again, some days our units were not running as much as we expected them to run, and we were able to save some money on fuel. Other expenses for September are $34.6 million, right on target, just $400,000 under budget. No, not a big variance there. That brings me to the net income for September, which is $11.6 million, which is $900 million over budget. Sorry, 900,000. I told you it was a good month, but not that good. Year-to-date net income is $86.4 million, which is $4.8 million under budget. And I want to take a moment here to remind everyone that the majority, if not all, of the under budget net income for the year is mostly explained by the mark-to-market effects that we've taken on our investments. Interest rates have risen since the beginning of the year, and we have to market our investments. That is a non-cash issue. We haven't liquidated those securities. We have a buy and hold strategy, so we expect that those securities will stay in place And when we liquidate them, it'll be the time, actually, when they mature, we will get the full value of those securities. In the meantime, we have to do the mark-to-market, and that's what we have taken a hit on negative expenses for net income.
Is that what hit you in the decommission?
Correct.
Investment in
Absolutely.
mark to market?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have quite a bit of investments in there, and they're also subject to mark-to-market. They're all fixed income investments, and of course, those are the ones that are mostly affected by interest rates.
Okay.
From an operating perspective, operating income, we are looking really good. We're in the black, and I'm optimistic for another strong end of 2018. Probably not as strong as 2017, but certainly another good year for OPPD. And this is really the story of good fiscal discipline. I have to commend the 1,800 employees that work here, that we're really doing fantastic work in using the assets that we have. Capital expenditures for September were low, $7.9 million, which is $12.5 million under budget. As we've had storms and rainy days, our capital work has slowed down. Depending on how October turns out, we may be able to pick up some of that work later in the year, but some of this work is weather dependent. So we're working closely with our business units to make sure that we're tracking that capital spend towards the end of the year.
And actually, I'll just share with the board, the conversation yesterday at our senior management meeting is, are there some projects that don't require us to get in the ground that we may want to move forward in the remaining months of 18, and then have that not impact our 2019 budget, or let's trade those capital. And we're doing a lot of projects in the ground, and we can't get in there with large pieces of equipment. It just pushes it out, and then pretty soon we'll move into the frost side of the business, and so we'll there's a lot of projects out there, but we may try to move some capital in from other parts of the organization.
Those are what I call ready now capital projects. We're trying to move
exactly.
them in.
I suppose this is an annual kind of thing you have to deal with as far as schedule flexibility.
We do. I would
Well,
say
this
the
may-
moisture has probably been more this year than we've ever seen in a long time for projects. I know other contractors and developers are struggling with the same kinds of issues, so so it's been a little unique this year, but each year is unique in some way, so.
And the last bullet point is on unrestricted cash balance at the end of September was $462.8 million, which is $69 million over budget. Remember that we're carrying some excess cash from previous years, so that's what causes that budget variance. Good year, good month for cash. If you move to page 6 in the report, it has a graph. I think it speaks nicely to what happened. In August, we used $177 million of our unrestricted cash to pay off debt service, and you can see that dip in August on our cash balances. We waited 2 weeks, 15 days to be precise, before we priced bonds, and we closed on the bond transaction on September 25th to pay for capital expenditures that we had already incurred and replenish our cash balances, and that resulted in an infusion of cash of approximately $145 million to the, $145 million of bond proceeds, $161 million of capital cash infusion to our funds. That brought our cash balances back up to $462.8 million, which is, again, at the level that we were expecting, higher than 230 days cash on hand, which is fantastic from a financial health perspective. And we were able, again, to use that cash to pay off existing debt, take advantage of interest rates, and achieve some savings, which is the topic of the next item. So unless there are any questions, I can skip to the next one. Okay, so on the reporting item is on the electric system revenue bonds 2018 Series A. Back at the September board meeting, I mentioned preliminary results. We were very excited. We got really good rates. We were able to secure savings for the district. We were still refining all the numbers, so the numbers I gave you were preliminary, and I'm happy to report that the final numbers were slightly better than what I reported back in September. The transaction resulted in us issuing $145 $0.3 million of bonds with a final maturity of 2039 and an average interest rate of 3.15. If you recall, the bonds that we paid off with cash were at above 4%, so we were able to basically replenish our funds with debt issued at 3.15%. These resulted in total debt service savings of $39.5 million over the life of the bonds. On a net present value in today's dollars, $15.1 million. We would not have been able to do this transaction without our financial health. This is extremely important for me to emphasize that many issuers, many other public power districts would love to have the opportunity to do this, but they may not have the opportunity because they may not have the cash balances or the financial strength that we have. This is one of the key, a very good example of what a financially healthy organization can do for us. And with that, I yield to any questions.
Kudos, great job. The whole
Great
team.
news.
Well, since we have
You're all
Mr.
here.
Thurber and Mr. Petrulis back there, they were leading the teams that completed both transactions. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
That's it? Okay, that's it. Okay, nuclear, Tom?
I'm going to turn it over to Mary Fisher.
We can get rid of you middleman.
That's all we are.
Reporting on how our spent fuel horizontal storage modules construction project is going. Christy, would you mind? I brought you a couple pictures today. You had seen these blocks being set up on a pad that was put there for construction. Now you see them actually going and being placed out at our ISFAC, ready for canisters to move our fuel at the fall of next year. 28 of the 32 canisters, horizontal modules, have been put in place. We have 4 remaining, kind of waiting for the weather a little bit to help us with that. I did put out a note late last week that we had moved the end wall, the end cap off the ISFAC. This has never been done in the industry before. It was a first of a kind, first time at doing this. And basically what you have is a block of concrete that sits at the end of that for shielding from radioactivity at the end of the ISFAC. We actually moved that out, put a metal liner in there. And the reason that we did that is at the end of this, and I said in the director's update that we have about 4 inches to spare at the end of this. If we had not had enough room, if we had not moved that end wall out and moved it to the end of this line, we would have had to build another pad. And so it's quite unique. It's never been done in the industry before. It was done flawlessly by our men and women at Fort Calhoun. They did an excellent job. They mocked it up, they did a dry run on it, and then they performed it extremely well. And as you can see, the modules are in place. If you go to the next one, Christy. So lots of people ask me, so what's next and why are we not moving fuel earlier? Well, this has to do with the canisters or the liners that go inside of those concrete modules. This is the first, so we took a picture of the very first one coming off, ready to go. Christy, the next picture. And we also, this is a mock-up of what the internals will look like. So they haven't even started building these yet, but they mocked it up so that they could make sure that it would fit into that liner. We had several people out watching this and continue to watch this as we go forward, watching the extrusion of the metal, making sure that the welding is going right, looking how they're doing their non-destructive testing on the welding that's going on, and making sure that those canisters are going to meet all of the qualifications necessary to put our spent fuel in them. So quite the project going on. This is all being done in the Carolinas, and so we have people traveling back and forth pretty much every week to go out and make sure that we're doing things correctly.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No, it's
so
fine.
in that thing, the rods will be set into those shelves, into those
Correct.
cubby holes?
Correct.
And they're, what, 8 feet long or?
They're 12 feet, I believe.
Okay. And then that entire, looks like that room organizer will be put into?
Into that
the
canister, if you go
Pringles
back
can?
one, it would go into the can.
Okay.
It will
The
go
coffee
into here.
can. Okay.
And then that can, if you go back one more, will go into the concrete bunker.
Okay. And one coffee can will fit into one of those holes?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And each
Perfect.
of those coffee cans and those inserts are different.
Simplify.
So you have to have a mock-up based on what the radioactivity of each of those fuel rods are, or how does that work? How do you
No, they'll
mix
all
up
be the
fuel rods?
same, but we have to actually look at how we put the fuel. We'll be very particular about which fuel rod goes in what location.
That's what I mean. Each
Right.
one, and you're gonna
It's
have to
the
do that
fuel
for
rod.
each canister.
Correct.
So you're gonna have a mock-up for each canister to figure out where the fuel rod goes, or you do that all computerized
We do it all
probably?
computerized.
Because
we
you've
have
already
it-
done that.
Yep, we will have it laid out. We know that as we went into this project early on, before we ever awarded it, we wanted to make sure that the characterization that we had done on our fuel, so each fuel rod was characterized, and we gave that to the vendor. The vendor has certified that it will fit in here in a specific arrangement in each one of these.
Right. That was all done ahead of time.
That was all done
That's
ahead of
okay.
time.
Bravo.
Okay,
And then one other question, and do you think, as far as actually moving the rods to the canisters, what is the timeline for that? Is that quicker than you thought it was, based on the different things? Or
No.
what timing do you have as far as the,
yeah, the manufacturing of these cans, like I said, the first one just came out. They've been working on them all summer. And so they're getting their assembly line going, and they're starting to roll out a little bit quicker. But we haven't even started building these. As I said, this is just a mock-up to see and make sure that it's
Right.
going to fit. And so we really don't expect to start until the fall next year, and then we'll go around the clock. We'll go until about June of 2020. June of 2020. So it'll be about a 6 to 9 month evolution.
thank you.
Mary, what's the name of the company that's doing this? in North Carolina?
What is the name of the company, Tim, that's doing this in North Carolina?
The company that we visited where this is being made is CHT, Columbiana High Tech. They're a subcontractor for Orano.
Have they been doing this a long time, or is this a new industry they're getting into with all the nuclear
Oh,
shutdowns?
I don't think this is a new industry that they're getting into.
The facility is fairly new, but they're creating these containers for other plants as well. There's a few ahead of us in the assembly line. We saw further in advanced production, yes.
Yeah, it's a good business for them to be in right now.
Well, they're talking about expanding.
I bet so.
Yes, yes.
So Tim Ewing and Ted Main were just there last week to
Yeah.
take a look at what was going on up there. And then our nuclear oversight, our non-destructive testing folks have been out there making sure that they're doing everything that they need to do. So our quality assurance folks have been out there for, the last 2 to 3 months to make sure it's all going well. One other thing to report, we had talked probably a couple months ago about our ISFAC security facility and the fact that we needed to go out and do some analysis of what the underground structures look like, if there were any interferences for our new security facility. And I'm happy to report that that's been done, and the subsurface analysis did not find anything, and so it was completed with no concerns. So I just wanted to make sure we closed the loop on that one and let you know that came back well for us. So we'll be moving forward with that. Last thing I want to do is, last month we came and we talked to you about the opportunity to move from Safe Store to Decon. And so I've asked Tim Ewing to join us again today to give you an update of where we stand on that.
Good afternoon. As Mary said, last month we were here and we talked about the opportunity to go into decon. The month before, we'd come back and we talked about decommissioning performance, how we'd done since we shut down in October of 2016. And we characterized that largely as on time and under budget based on the efforts of our folks and the work that we're doing with the vendors that are helping us complete this work. So this is really just the next phase or the next step in how we can proceed forward with this project. So we're here to talk today about decon, and we talked about comparing decon or deconstruction to Safe Store last time. We've refined that a little bit this month, and we've brought that back to discuss. I've put up there the exact definition of decon, so you can see what that wording is, but ultimately it's removing or cleaning the systems that are there so that site can be released for unrestricted use. The next couple of slides are a repeat of what you've seen the last couple months. Just to refresh us today, 2016, we decided to go into Safe Store when we made the decision to shut down Fort Calhoun Station. That was the right decision at that time. It was slightly favored over decon. It really gave us the time to go make sure that we could understand what decommissioning really was, make sure that our folks could perform, make that mindset shift, prove that we could perform on time and under budget, while maintaining the regulatory and financial flexibility that the district needed. Based on the work that we've done and what we've shown, we now have this opportunity to go into decon, and it provides all of these advantages. I would lump up most of the first ones and the bottom one into the category of sooner with more certainty. We eliminate the hazard sooner. We have more cost certainty because it's a nearer term project as opposed to delaying it for several decades. In the middle, we get into some of the people parts. One is going into deconstruction now would allow us to use the folks from Fort Calhoun, whether they're currently at Fort Calhoun or elsewhere in the district, with the site-specific expertise they have to complete deconstruction. And the one right below there is the encouraged continued employee engagement. We have had folks from throughout the district. It's not just Fort Calhoun that have been part of this project and the reason it's successful. We've challenged them. They've stepped up to the challenge. It's an opportunity to continue the work that they're doing and continue that engagement. And then the last couple that I would talk about is really the waste disposal. It eliminates that waste from site sooner, and it ensures that we have a waste disposal facility available to us. There's a couple in the United States right now that we're able to use. The one we use is in Clive, Utah currently, but we don't know what that looks like several decades from now either. Going now provides us that certainty that that is available to us. So when we looked at decon, we looked at 4 different options. The first option is an OPPD-led option. The second one is still led by OPPD, but with vendor support. You might think about that sort of what we're doing today with Energy Solutions today, but that, regardless of who that partner is, they'd have a greater presence on site to really help us out with that advanced decommissioning work that we would do. So that would combine the best of both worlds, FCS experience along with decommissioning experience. The next one is a contractor-led option, and I'll explain the difference between option C and D, but D is a complete license and fuel transfer. The difference really comes down to the license and who controls the site. In the options C and D, in both of those cases, the vendor makes the decisions, the vendor controls the site. In option C, that license would transfer back to OPPD at the completion of the deconstruction period. In option D, the complete license and fuel transfer, the vendor would take that license and the fuel responsibility, and it would not come back to OPPD. So as we looked at those, we eliminated option A, the purely OPPD led without assistance of a contractor providing us the support that we needed. And we did that because we don't believe we have the expertise that we need to take on a project of this magnitude without some additional support. But when we look at options B, C, and D, the OPPD led with the contractor, the purely contractor led, or the complete license and fuel transfer, we believe every one of those options provide all of these advantages to us over Safe Store. And it's the same things that we talked about just a few slides ago. It's that cost certainty, it's reducing our long-term risk, it's reducing that on-site radiological material, and making sure that we have a place to send it to. And then the last one we acknowledge there is the early release of the site. That's really a bonus to what could we do with the site next, whether it's a district function or an economic development opportunity. But then there's differences between those 3 options. One is the license differences, and I've discussed that a little bit, but I would combine that with the third bullet, who leads the project and who makes the decisions. If you own the license, you own the responsibility for making the right decisions. So in the OPPD-led version, we would maintain the license, we would maintain the regulatory decisions, but we would have the advantage of input from our contract support to make sure that we're making the right decisions at the right time. In a vendor-led, that license goes to the vendor, they make the decisions, and then at the end of it, the license comes back to us. With the fuel and license transfer option, the fuel, the license, they go to the vendor, they don't come back to OPPD. They're responsible for all site decisions and everything that happens on the site. One of the other differences there is the flexibility of the financial commitment. If it's an OPPD-led option, then we decide what activities we're doing when, we decide the cash flows. within realms of a realistic range, we could accelerate or slow down spending in a particular year if we needed to. If it's the vendors or the contractors, then that work is going to be done by them, and that cost schedule will be set up at the beginning of the project. External intervention potential. If it's an OPPD-led option, then we inform the NRC that we're going to this option, and we can commence deconstruction because it's our license. The license isn't changing hands. If the license were to change hands, that does require NRC approval. That would be something that we would submit with the contractor that we choose, and that could take anywhere from a year to a year and a half, we would anticipate, for that transfer to take place. As part of that, it would include public meetings where the public would have an opportunity to come in and voice their opinion on the transfer of that license.
If the license would change hands, would the NRC look at that in a favorable or less than favorable way, do you think, or not make much difference?
Mary talked about us going down to the facility that's creating the canisters last week. We were also at a decommissioning conference. And at that conference, the NRC was there, and they had a presentation. They would put it as long as the person doing the work has the real-world experience to do it and the financial assurity to complete the project, then they can transfer the license or not transfer the license. To them, it doesn't matter who owns it so much as making sure that the project will be completed and won't be a stranded project for them.
And has the NRC done this before? As far as, have they gone through the process? Has someone else gone through the process with the NRC as far as this license approval?
So the answer is yes and no to that. So for option C, where it's a license transfer but the license comes back to the facility, that has been done before. That's the model that was done at Zion with Energy Solutions at Exelon. Exelon transitioned the license to Energy Solutions for the duration of the deconstruction. The license will go back to Exelon at the end. In the complete license and fuel transfer, no. At Vermont Yankee in February of 2017, that request was submitted to the NRC. It's not yet approved. Based on my discussions with folks in the industry, we believe that's pending, but that has not been approved, and therefore the project's never been completed under that scenario. There are a few other plants that have decided to go that route as well. They'll be submitting their approvals with other vendors as well.
Tim, the long-term risk, which option provides the least risk to our customer owners?
That's a good question.
That's a fabulous question.
It's a great question.
I think the issue is each one provides different risk.
Right.
It's not that I think we can mitigate long-term risk in any one scenario. They're just all going to have different risk, and we have to evaluate which of those we want to take on and which we don't.
Controlling our license, to me, seems like we control the risk somewhat, but we also have an obligation for that risk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. When you turn it over to a contractor, depending on what each contractor says that they will do for us, then that's how we would get through. We would have to structure something with them to really understand what that is. And we're just not there today.
Yeah.
And the last bullet I put on there, I think maybe goes to your question a little bit, Director Mines, is the public perception piece. Whether it's OPPD that owns the license and is making the decisions, or it's a contractor doing that, it's still an OPPD run and built facility that the public still would ensure that we had responsibility for, or may hold us responsible for the work that was done there, just from a perception standpoint. So the financial comparison, so that's a big piece of this as well. We compared the license termination costs for Safe Store against the 3 decon options. And so last month we brought in the total cost. So it was license termination, spent fuel management, and site restoration. And we had a table up and we showed that the spent fuel costs and the site restoration were effectively the same. For each of the decon options, they're effectively the same as Safe Store too. So there's not much variability there. So we broke out just the license termination piece. That's the biggest bucket. It's the one that has the most variability. And we compared license termination for each of these decon options to the Safe Store options. And we'll show you that graph on the next slide. But what we found for any one of these options, the decon option is the more financially desirable option. And for every one of them, the funding required would be less than what's currently planned for the safe store scenario. And that safe store scenario, just as a reminder, does support that 5-year no general rate increase. So this would be even an advantage over that. So the bars on this page are the annual costs, and the lines are cumulative costs. The cumulative costs go to the axis on the right, and the annual costs to the axis on the left. The orange is decon, the blue is safe store, and these are in inflated dollars. So you can see that over time, the safe store scenario in inflated dollars is a little over twice that of a decon scenario. And this decon scenario would encompass any one of the 3 options. And of course, once we select an option, we will do an updated decommissioning cost estimate to really refine this number even further. So we talked about money, we talked about risk, and here's the people impact. I'm going to start with the bottom of the graph, which is the complete license and fuel transfer. The first thing I would say is that in any of these options, the 2019 and 2020 staffing is not impacted. It will stay the same. If we go into one of these other ones, or one of these other options, then it will change starting in 2021. In the complete license and fuel transfer, there will be no OPPD employees left on site. That would all go to the contractor. There is some opportunity for our OPPD employees to transition to that new company, but we wouldn't know what that is until we work through any sort of negotiations we would do. The next line up is a vendor-led option. The difference between the vendor-led and the complete license transfer is the independent spent fuel storage installation. Since at the end of the project that's coming back to OPPD, we would continue to run it in the interim, so you're not transitioning to one company now and back to us in another 7 or 8 years. So we would maintain that. It's about 50 people to run that facility. The next lineup is the blue line. That's the safe store line that I think we've shown before. That's about 10 extra people over that dry cask storage operation, just to maintain the buildings that would be needed or wouldn't be taken down if we stayed in safe store. The orange line is the OPPD-led decon scenario, and these are not final numbers, but we believe the direction and trend is correct on the number of personnel that we would be able to utilize to leverage their experience and skills in that decommissioning project. So that goes down from about 190 starting in 2021 down to the same 50 people that would be required for that ISFA-C installation at the end of the decommissioning project.
Tim, you mentioned that 2019 and 2020 there were really no differences between those scenarios, and maybe I'm confused, but 2019 they're all at the same point, roughly over 300. I assume that's roughly what our current employee number is, give or take. But when I look at 2020, there's the OPPD-led version still puts us at just, you know, somewhere between 250, 300, where the other 3 scenarios are at the same point. Right? So I'm looking at 2020 numbers.
I think that's just a matter of how the graph is showing it.
Okay.
The 2019 and 2020 numbers wouldn't change much. Where the variability might be is whether that reduction and the transfer to the contractor would be at the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021. Right. But they're both predicated on the fact that we would have all that fuel moved to the pad, to the ISFA-C in the middle of 2020, and then we could make any changes after that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So to summarize the options, option A was the OPPD-led version with no additional support, and that's the one that we eliminated based on our lack of expertise in decommissioning. Option B is OPPD-led with the contractor that leverages the skills and experience specific to Fort Calhoun with the skills and experience of an experienced decommissioning contractor. The contract would also share in the risk and reward of the project. And that has the least impact on our people, as we saw on the previous graph. Options Charlie and Delta, the contractor-led or the complete transfer, have a lot of the same items that go with them. The contractor has complete control over the decisions, the community relations, the funding, the project execution. That is up to the contractor to complete that work. And the difference being with option D is that the license for the fuel would not come back to OPPD at the end of the project. It would stay with the contractor. And that gets to the end of my presentation where we talk about the action that we are requesting. We are requesting permission to go into deconstruction, decon, and we would like to go out and negotiate and award a contract with a contractor that would provide the best value to OPPD and our customer owners. There are a limited number of contractors that have the specialty and expertise in this area. It's really a small field. We believe that we can get the best deal for our customer owners by going out and negotiating with those folks. Yes.
What's kind of the tentative date for when walls start coming down and construction starts, like piles of bricks?
Piles of bricks is really after that dry cask storage project is complete, so the middle of 2020.
Okay.
Moving to this option now allows us to start planning for that, so we're ready to hit the ground running as soon as that fuel is moved.
I think maybe the question was a little different. You're asking when we would actually start wrecking the buildings
Yeah.
themselves? Yeah, that would be later in the project, so it's about a 10-year project, so probably in the 26, 27
Okay.
timeframe. It's right at the tail end. You do all of the internal work first, removing all the radioactive pipe, that sort of thing, and you get all of that shipped off, and then you go in and you would demo the buildings themselves.
Is the stuff, if we go take it to Clive, Utah, is that by rail or is that by truck?
Yes. Depends on the size
Federal
of what
Express?
it depends on the size of what we're transporting, right? And so some of it'll be rubblized and it'll go out in trucks. Some of it'll be large components that'll go out by rail. At least at this point in time, we think they may go out by rail. Part of what we're asking to do would be to go out and talk with these contractors and really understand what their plan would be. So we have the opportunity to do both.
Okay.
Jim, and this may have been discussed in last month's committee meetings. I believe that I was not able to attend. But I guess a logical question would be is why the shifting gears and going into the decon plan at this point as opposed to when we initially planned to decommission the plant? And also, how much of a financial impact will we suffer as a result of doing this now as opposed to back then? Is that easy to answer? I don't even know if that's...
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really the genesis behind this whole recommendation, is that the reason for making that shift now is because of the performance of our employees over the last 2 years that have performed on time and under budget, which has given us the opportunity to go out and evaluate a decon scenario and what that would do. This improves the financial position. It requires less funding than we are currently planning for Safe Store. So really for our customer owners, it's a more financially viable option.
Was this a consideration from the start to consider this at this point? Okay.
It was, and Mary was more involved with that than I at that time, but we looked at those options. But since we had never been in decommissioning, we had very few people with experience in decommissioning. It was the prudent choice to go into Safe Store at that time and really figure out what this was all going to entail and prove that we could perform.
I think at the last meeting we did say that we thought that there was about a $200 million savings by going from Safe Store to decon. Most of that is because you don't have the upkeep of the buildings anymore for 50 years.
But the idea that that $200 million would have been greater if we had gone to decon from the get-go is not an indication at all.
No, we would have been doing the same work between 2016 and now, actually through 2020. All of that work is basically the same between Safe Store or decon. One of the things that, as we've talked about this, the reason to make the decision now is as we plan for 2019 and 2020, we don't want to be doing rework if we make the decision later. That's the point at which we're starting to say that we really need to have the decision now so that we're planning appropriately and that we're sequencing the work appropriately.
You say rework, like duplication, I guess?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we go back to 2016, I think one of the conversations that we had with the board at the time was, typically operators of nuclear plants begin to have this conversation about the decommissioning decision multiple years in advance and to be able to plan and do all those pieces into play. As we began to accelerate that, we didn't want to make the decision on decon because we didn't feel, one, regulatorily we were in a position to do that. We were not financially positioned to be able to do that, and we wanted to be able to roll those plans, put those plans in place, and understand those impacts at the time. So this kind of couple years has really allowed us the opportunity to do that assessment, and in that process, what we heard from folks, whether it would be domestically or internationally, in Germany, as an example, with some of the folks that we talked to, there was those that tried to move the decon right away had some difficulties doing that, and they kind of had to back up. And so what gave us the greatest flexibility in SafeStore was the regulatory flexibility, the financial flexibility, and now that we have those kind of shored up, now we're in a much better position to really evaluate the decon. And so we see financial savings. We see what we believe is financial savings, just the difference between SafeStore and decon, the risk of spreading this out over multiple years, where other plants will also be decommissioning, and the competition around the resources and contractors to be able to do that. We think we're right now in a sweet spot to be able to do this and to begin to move forward with it. So,
and I would say it's not unusual in the industry for utilities to choose SafeStore, and then as they get through those first few years and they get their fuel out onto their ISFSI pads to move to decon. It's very typical.
Mary, if I remember the financial impact, and I agree with your recommendation, keeping our employees on board gives us a great advantage with experience and knowing the plant. There's an additional cost to keeping those employees, but I think, and we've talked about this, that as they understand the plant, understand its intricacies, and I believe that we may even be able to close this thing down a little sooner than projected, maybe sooner than 10 years. Mm-hmm. And that's saving money as well. Mm-hmm. So you can't factor that into your projections, but as we've talked,
just to be clear, this recommendation is for us to evaluate those three options, B, C, and D, and then come back to the board to report kind of our recommendation that we're moving forward in the contract that we'll award to move forward with that. But we understand and appreciate that feedback on those pieces as well. I mean, I think we believe there's some advantages of that, but we want to evaluate all of those elements in those options.
So in the recommendation moves forward.
This is a recommendation to negotiate and award a contract to move to decon.
And so how does that play out a little bit? Does that, you're talking with several different contractors and about several different scenarios?
Correct. Right? That is correct. And so what we'll do.
You saw up there.
Those three, yes.
And our intent would be to negotiate, award that contract, come back to the board and report the elements of that contract and the advantages that we've been able to craft in that negotiations. I just want to make sure we're very clear about that.
Yeah, what kind of timeline are you looking at then for that? I mean, that seems like a lengthy discussion.
It is, but this is an informed recommendation that we're bringing to you. We feel we know that we have contractors out in the industry that are capable and willing. We've at least had some preliminary discussions with them, but again, getting down and really understanding, back to the question I think Director Mines had, was about the risk involved and how we would mitigate that. That's really what we need the time to do, is to get more into the details.
Yeah, and then to add on to that, I'm sure you've got a background operation where Stephen perhaps or someone else is checking out the severability assurances of option D, the long tail liability that either we would have or even nearby citizens, users of that power, should the contractor fail with an option D. So that would be I would like to have a lot of assurance if that's the way we go.
So do we, by the way.
So do we.
Yeah, you're
all
absolutely,
great comments and all things that we need to investigate in more detail between now and, I would say, November, December board meetings.
Okay.
So there's obviously a lot of good opportunities there with the employees, and I get that. So walk me through again where the cost on the front end or the back end. Where are we saving the 200 million on the back end or front? We're going to pay it up front anyway, right?
The 200 million is really the upkeep of the buildings that will no longer be there. So if the buildings are no longer there, we no longer have preventative maintenance. And when you do that over 50 years, it adds up to about 200 million. So that's the majority of the 200 million that we would be.
How much would that be each year for the next 50 years?
Oh, I don't remember the numbers, I'm sorry.
And then on the other thing, so we get it cleaned up, do we ever turn it over to City of Fort Calhoun or a contractor, or we just put barbed wire around the place and no one ever goes in there? What's it look like in 20 years, sometime in my real life?
Our intent would be to bring that property, or the contractor to bring that property to a point where there are no environmental issues. It's been cleared by that. Matter of fact, one of the vendors just got approval from the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency to clear their site to be able to use for additional development for another utility that's going through decommissioning. Our intent would be able to do that, and we could either use that, as Tim said early on in the presentation, for OPPD reasons, to utilize that facility and site, or to look at it from other economic development or building growth opportunities that may occur.
And that's been done.
And utilize those.
Somebody's done that.
Oh, yeah. They're
Pretty common.
Correct, yep.
Yeah.
That was the next question.
That's, the NRC calls it unrestricted use, so they no longer have any jurisdiction over it. They've said that they've deemed it to be clean for any
Yeah.
use that we want.
And that could happen in 10 years maybe for our facility.
That's what we would like to do
Yeah.
if we go to decon, yeah.
And then, Tim, you talked about, say, expertise. We're going to go out and negotiate. So how many plants have been closed down over the years? Or, I mean, where do we find the expertise what is a good example? We've done 5 of these, and we've been doing it for 20 years. Or how many people are out there? Because Tim's talking about we've got good employees. Our own employees would be doing it, but then we're entering maybe with a good contractor. How many are out there? And you're afraid they might be so busy in the future, we're going to be paying up probably for that expertise.
I would say there's 3 to 5 in the industry that are in this business, but there's less than that have real-world experience.
So we're somewhat limited on that.
There's really only
So
1 or 2.
Yeah, so we've sorted that out already. We're not looking for someone to test the waters in a project like this. We're looking for people who have done components around decommissioning and done that before. And so as we've talked to vendors that are in that option B, C, and D, it's those that we've already filtered through that we feel that have competency to be able to deliver on any one of those options.
So this, I think it's fair to say that if we go with particular options C or D, this would be one of the largest contracts that we've had in a long time, right?
Yeah,
And I don't have a sense for what the numbers are, but
I would say it's one of the large contracts for sure.
One of them, not the largest.
well, it's a big one.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
not
big
the
one.
largest. Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around us as a board relinquishing any ownership of the awarding of that contract. And I'm totally thinking out loud here, so I
No, that's fine.
apologize.
Hey, that's,
But given the risk, given the impact on employees up there, given the size of the contract, I understand why you want to direct negotiate it, right? Like, there are only a couple vendors, you're going to get a better outcome. I'm trying to get over the hump of us saying, okay, well, any of these 3 options is great, go get them. When the 3 options are really different, you know, like the impact on employees is really significantly different. The extent to which, you know, if we turn it over, or the extent to which this contractor really becomes the public face of this, is a really different scenario than us taking the lead. So I guess I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm having a little bit of trouble getting over that.
sure.
Because I personally, like, when I look at it, I'm by no means in the weeds, right? Like, you guys are the experts, but when I look at it, I have a preference, after spending 15 minutes thinking about it, for us leading it. For us owning it, it's our plant, we know it better. I don't know what the financial differences are between all those scenarios, but to me, that's what I'm leaning towards, and again, without having spent a lot of time other than.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
True.
we're gonna need more information, and I think they'll get it back to us.
Well, but they'll get it back to us, but we're essentially, the
We
request
can
is
sort of-
for
I
us to
think
allow
everyone
you
has-
to award the contract, right?
So we do have a closed session today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To give you some more information, competitive information that I can't
Okay.
share in an open session.
All right.
And that may help to address some of your
Okay.
questions.
All right.
I think we
All
share
right.
your, I think most of us probably share your concerns.
Sure we do.
And that's why, hopefully, we will have a number of options presented that we can weigh all these concerns at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with those options, we're all gonna look at our employees and how good our employees are. If you look at how much they have saved for us so far, I think that moving around the ISFIS, he saved how much money, how many millions?
Oh, I don't
12
know.
million, he said?
It was millions of dollars to have to rebuild
Yeah.
something like that, to
And,
extend
you know,
it.
our team did that, you know, and we have to look at that over price sometimes, of what somebody is gonna say, oh, we'll do this. So we're gonna have to look at that. It's a great.
Yes,
As
and
we're in
I
closed
apologize,
session.
I didn't realize, I didn't know what we were gonna discuss in closed session, so I'm gonna swallow half of my comments.
No, I think those are
No, I
great.
think it's a
I
great
think it's good to
discussion.
bring them out right now, though.
Yeah.
You know, I
And
think that
and
everybody has a.
I would share this. The conversation the senior team has had, just to be very honest with you, is that if the recommendation that we get and the award is in that C and D, that if the board wants us to come back to get their approval to do that, then, you know, we're certainly open to do that. And the board may decide, listen, we want to, whatever recommendation or decision you make, we want you to come back and have the board approve it, right?
Which I think
Because
is proper.
it's a big, but that'll be a conversation that I think, you know, we can certainly have, and we certainly understand that. I think our point for, as we crafted this recommendation is we're going to be meeting with them, is to begin to move very clearly to a negotiated piece, move to award, move to integrating them as quickly as we can into the process. But let's have that conversation.
Tim,
That'd be good.
Would it be fair to say what Director Kavanaugh was saying? You won't really know until you're negotiating. So is a lot of this, would it take place during those negotiations of A, B, C, or D? You don't really know until you're negotiating.
Yeah,
and then
we've
you
done
come
some
back.
kind of broad stuff today. It's not
You got an idea
finalized.
probably where you'd like to go, like
Yep.
that. But you never know what's going to
Never
happen in
know.
that negotiation? Is that what you're kind of saying here?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
All right. Well, I'll wait till.
Yeah, sounds good. I appreciate that.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you,
very much.
Tim.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tim.
Tim, for all your work.
That's good.
Is that it, Tom? Nuclear? Okay. Next up is the public information, Ann.
Public information. We've been a little busy, our committee. We've met, and we have been reviewing SD7. And last week we met, and when we met, we, at that time, had received, as far as public comment, 48 comments and direct requests for input. We received and reviewed 169 comments prior to the September 13th meeting. And then we received and reviewed 15 comments from October 3rd, 2018, from the commercial and industrial customers' response to what is the most important thing OPPD can do for you. Since then, since this morning, since 2 o'clock yesterday, I've gotten another 14 pages of comments. Based on that, and we've had discussion with the committee, we would like to hold back and meet again and look at these comments and review them, and then hopefully decide to go to a vote next month. November is what we're hoping for this vote. But I think there's enough information that everyone, we have a lot of stakeholders who've given us a lot of information. I think next time we have to have an earlier cutoff date, and we're going to work with you about that, a cutoff date for both directors and for stakeholders. We can't be getting stuff the night before. We really can't discuss it adequately, so. And it was extended 24 hours. In those 24 hours, we thank all the people who finally put it in. We have a lot of people who are procrastinators, so now we're going to look at the procrastinators' views. And discuss that. So I think that's what we're going to do at this
Could I
time.
ask, Lisa, do we know if these are all OPPD customers, or is it open to the world to comment?
We do have a method to make sure that they are OPPD customers.
And we're using that, so these are, we can trust these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
So I think we're going to wait for the report on that. So it'll be
Yeah.
a shorter report now, and we'll come back later, if that's
Sure.
okay. And Scott, if you want to talk a little bit about what we've had with so far, it might be interesting for everybody. You've sort of,
Just to recap kind
To
of
recap.
where we were with the notion that.
Right.
Again, we'll postpone conversation then until.
Yes.
next month, just so I can, thank you, Director McGuire. High-level summary, if you remember, SD7, as all of our policies, kind of follows a process where on an annual basis we're monitoring compliance with all of them. It also tees up the conversation. Does the policy itself continue to reflect the desired direction of the board? SD7 has made it through process. It's currently out of committee. It had moved over here. To Director McGuire's point, we've received a lot of public feedback. As a result of this public feedback, technically speaking, it's going back a bit into committee for discussion and review of all the additional feedback that's been received. Yes, sir.
timeline. So last time we met, we reminded ourselves that the 30 days of comment was really 28 days and not 30,
this
right?
is really 30 this time.
No.
We did it for tonight.
And so I'm curious as to, I don't know of a deadline extension. I mean, can someone explain what that was?
Let me get the language from the actual press release, because we did have a timetable in there. And then yesterday when we met for PI, it was one of those that we said, let's go ahead and continue accepting comments.
Okay.
That's what we did.
Hold on, continue accepting comments the end of day yesterday or further?
Through the end of the day.
Okay, yeah.
So we cut it off at midnight last night.
Yep.
Which would have been the 28 days from when we decided.
Yeah, I think the 30
Give or
day
take.
was a general between board meeting to board meeting.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
kind of the,
Yeah.
yeah, that.
A month.
Yeah,
Right.
right,
So-
a month between
then-
board meeting to board meeting, or committee meeting, whatever that may be.
And I would also, so on that, I would also add that I expect that, well, part of the reason I think we were interested in ensuring that we not only had time to digest all the comments, but also gave people time, gave people an opportunity to come to the board meeting tomorrow.
Correct,
Actually
to
be
make comments.
present and.
Thursday.
Thursday.
Thursday, thank you. Yeah.
And I think perhaps it would be good if we go to some of the comments that we already had, and we
Yes.
do have a response from management as far as an idea that we need to just sort of discuss too. So if we
Sure.
want to go ahead.
Flashing quickly, just so you know what people were responding to, was really this red-line version. The only thing that stayed true to the prior policy were the words that are still in black. So nearly the entire policy was reworded based upon conversation and committee discussion. This was what was submitted, and through a variety of things. We had multiple Facebook postings, Twitter postings, activity around that. Omaha World Herald had published an article that went out on October 4th. And to Director McGuire's point, we had received quite a few comments across. The theming of the comments as we looked through them, trying to surface and see if there are patterns that really emerged, I think is important. By far, the strongest comment was really made around us establish a vision for 100% renewable energy, carbon-free, keep renewable energy sales target. There was quite a bit of comment on include reduction targets for other air pollutants, as well as this last bullet. There were much fewer comments actually on this. Additionally, I think it's important to note that out of the number of comments, really it reflects, I think we did a math yesterday, out of 300 and some thousand customers, we had a little over 200 comments. So it's important, I think, to surface kind of the themes that you're seeing across multiple categories and the diversity of opinion that really surfaces when we're sharing something like this. On the other side, you had a lot of conversation and feedback around reliability and resiliency are important consideration. Energy sources should provide certainty and flexibility and balance, so affordability, reliability, and sustainability is important. Again, to Director McGuire's point, what we received this morning is about 30 additional comments that have been received sometime between 2 p.m. And midnight last night. So I think what Director McGuire is requesting is time to sort and look through that, and what Director Moody is suggesting is time to hear any comments that may surface during a board meeting discussion on Thursday.
Yeah, but I think there's also, I think, and I know you may now wanted to dive into this detail, but I think it's really important after the Public Information Committee, the senior management team had the opportunity to meet yesterday and talk through some of, one, the feedback that we were getting, some of the Public Information Committee's conversation around renewable percentages as well as carbon reduction. And so I would like, you know, Mary or Javier or Scott or just to talk a little bit about what we sent to the board last night, kind of in a broad sense of that conversation, what we believe is our recommendation as a senior management team.
Sure.
Mary?
This was really a discussion from senior management yesterday, so it really is a team effort. As we walked through the comments that came back as well as the discussion at the PI committee yesterday, it became one of the prime considerations was, should we have a % renewable goal in addition to a carbon intensity goal? I can tell you from the senior management team, a carbon intensity goal to us really does mean that we're looking at how we can make our operations reduce our carbon footprint over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. And that really is important for us as we have, for me in particular, the staff at our coal facilities at North Omaha and Nebraska City, that they understand the way that we intend to operate these plants going forward. So to me, that is really something that resonates with our employees and is an important goal for us. As we look at renewables, if you have a renewable goal, just a renewable goal, does really nothing for us in terms of really speaking to how we intend to operate those facilities. And so we thought that it was important to make this shift. Percent renewables in and of themselves, you could have a situation where if you put in a % renewable goal and we are trying to balance that with how we're operating our units, that at the end of the day you could sub-optimize or not get to the optimal solution of how we want to move forward given those two parameters, because they can work against each other as well as together. And so our concern has been, if we have both of those, how is it that we reconcile that and how is it that we manage it? And so I think as we spoke yesterday, Javier came to us with the idea about, we should really, say something about if we're going to put in a % renewable goal, what does that look like? So we have these two competing interests that we really haven't tried to put into effect collectively yet. And the recommendation that we came up with was if we have to go that way, or if we feel like that is an important component from our customer owners and the board of directors, that we stay with a goal that we believe is manageable, and that we can do some operationally look at it, and as soon as we go into our resource planning and we look at optimizing that, take both of these into consideration and really get some experience as to how these two would go together. And so our recommendation was to not go over 50%, at least for the near term, because that will help us to understand how these two competing interests are going to work together if you should put it into an SD7. Javier?
So I think our thought was in the policy would have this target of 50% renewable and 20% carbon reduction based on the conversations we've had over the last month or so with the board.
Carbon capacity.
Right, so carbon intensity reduction of 20%. So
Let me, another piece here is that the 50%, it's not a walk in the park by any stretch of the imagination. I've, talking to our resource planners, talking to our engineers, it is going to stretch our system significantly. It will put a lot of pressure to our system and to the reliability of the system. We believe that with time and improvements in technology, we may be able to get there. It is certainly our goal. We've stated that in our annual report that we are striving to get to 50%, but it's not a walk in the park. From a reliability perspective, from a financial perspective, the same thing. But I think this is something that we're willing to push ourselves, push the organization, stretch out the organization to try to achieve that long-term directional goal. Anything higher than 50%, it's where our planners, our reliability engineers start getting very, very nervous.
Even our RTOs get a little nervous
with the RTOs and everything. The other piece
that those objectives.
A percent renewable does, as Mary said, in my personal opinion, that should be an output of our optimization processes. When we are looking at the 15 different strategic directives and all the things that the board is asking us to do, we optimize our resources and we try to deliver on all directives, on all goals: rates, reliability, environmental stewardship, carbon intensity. The optimization process should have as an output what is the balancing, what is the balanced portfolio we will have. In my personal opinion, the percent renewables should not be an input to that. It by definition, it sub-optimizes the optimization process. It also does not provide any incentive for us to refuel existing coal plants, for example. Right? If all we're looking at is at percent renewables and not necessarily in the emission piece, it does very little for us to think about how do we potentially refuel different fossil fuel plants that we have. This is one of the reasons why I believe the carbon intensity piece is so important for us, and it does give direction. It is relevant, and it is not necessarily in contrast with what we've been saying so far on the 30% renewables. If the board and the public thinks that we must keep the percent renewables in place, then I agree with 50%, which has been our goal for the past few years, keeping the 50% as a directional goal, just as we're keeping the 20% under rates as a directional goal. It's something that we will push the organization as far as we can to achieve while we are measuring ourselves by the 20% decrease in carbon intensity. That's what I have to add.
Yeah, so these are goals, they're not laws. I mean, you say, oh, if we're gonna do this, and rates would go up 20%, you know, I bet you $100 that, no, we're not gonna do that. These are goals that we're striving to get to on all these SDs. I mean, they're not exactly the way I always understood the SD formulas and we were here to create them. So they're, yeah, what's the stretch, but if we're gonna set unrealistic goals, it makes no difference at all. They're kind of the stretch goals, you know, but not unrealistic. So basically what you're saying, choose one or the other. Is that what I'm hearing you saying? Or
well, what I would say is
carbon intensity.
Carbon intensity,
intensity.
And if you must choose, if you must keep the percent renewables because that's what the public understands or because it's important, I would suggest, as senior management said yesterday, to keep it as a directional goal. 50%, we are aiming at 50%. We don't know when, we don't know how. We know it's going to be a stretch, but we think we can achieve it at some point. It's realistic and somewhat realistic, and I think it gives the organization something to aim for, if you must keep that in place.
I've long felt that a strategic directive should not have specific hard and fact numbers for goals. It should be a general philosophy. If you establish a hard goal and you reach it relatively easily, you generally have a tendency to rest at that point. If you're a little short of reaching that goal and you feel the pressure to get there, you worry about sometimes things being compromised to reach that level. So I'm just not sold on having specific numbers for goals. And when you were talking about a philosophy, but I've said this before, and now we're looking at changing our measuring sticks. Well, what the hell? I Wouldn't it have been a lot easier if we just had this from the get-go?
I would say from a date perspective, I would absolutely agree with you. If you have a date that says we got to be X by X, it will force you to make suboptimal decisions potentially, right? And we don't want to be in that situation. And so that's the balance that from that perspective, we think directionally, hey, if a % renewable the board believes is required to be in there, we would say 50% is a reasonable directional point that we can, over a period of time, begin to look at and measure and figure out what that looks like. Now, I don't know if that's 2020 or 2025 or 2030 or 2035. I don't know that, right? Because what happens is our load continually grows in some respects, right? We're seeing some uptick in that, kind of in that 2 to 3% now from a sub 1%. We're seeing a little bit of growth occur with some things that are occurring on our system. So those are good things. But as that growth does occur, that requires us to think about what that % looks like. And so to Javier's point, it is going to be a stretch for us to get there. We're getting pressure from the RTOs on resiliency related issues, right? As utilities begin to go out with large objectives on renewables, on creating a unresilient system from a transmission. It's probably certainly felt more so on the transmission side than the distribution, but that's the next piece where you would feel is on the distribution side. So I think our perspective is that's why we don't think the date's probably right. Even maybe the 20% reduction in carbon intensity, to have a date there, because it drives you to make, I think, decisions that would put at risk some of the other strategic directives and sub-optimize and sub-optimal decisions. So we felt pretty comfortable to balance those two, and we thought it was important for the board to hear the senior management engagement around not just customer feedback, but some of the committee conversations yesterday, and begin to kind of put out what we believe is a reasonable strategic directive.
Yeah.
It's important to think about the business that we're in, right? The business is all about balance. Over the course of, however many years we've been doing this, the balance that you have, I have an obligation to serve anybody that comes, right? I have that obligation. I have to balance that with how do I meet that and meet all the SDs that you've given us. So this is not a typical business where you have the opportunity to take on a customer or not take on a customer. We take on all customers within our service territory. And as we do that, the balance becomes important for us as we move forward. Given the intermittency of renewables that are coming into the SPP footprint is what's leading to the discussion about the resiliency of the system. How resilient is the system? And quite frankly, from my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, the utility business across the nation has been living on the shoulders of our parents and our grandparents. And at this point in time, we're pushing the system to where we're going to have to make some choices about how we move forward. And I think that's part of the discussion that we need to have.
You say that when you're living on the parents, like on the infrastructure needs?
Exactly.
Transmission grid?
On the infrastructure, yes.
I thought you meant this.
Mark?
Well, what I'm hearing, and I don't necessarily disagree with anything that's been said, is that the people, the management team, who are immersed in this all day, every day, are saying that the more meaningful measurement is carbon intensity in terms of what we should go forward with. I'm personally not comfortable having multiple goals in one SD, because I think it's highly likely they will eventually conflict, and then you have to make choices that probably are, you call it sub-optimized, but I'll call it the wrong choices. There's nothing that prevents us from having carbon intensity as the goal and continuing to report on our percent renewables, because we've kind of trained the ratepayers to watch renewables. And it's easier it's an easier thing to perceive than a carbon intensity number, because it's a scale of 0 to 100, and carbon intensity, you don't have real context other than a % reduction. So, you know, that's kind of where my head is at, and I have to kind of defer to the experts here on the management team.
And that,
what's meaningful.
That is the thing that people, you know, in their comments, they're confused about what carbon intensity meant.
Yeah.
And renewables are just a very, very small portion of the entire OPPD system. And renewables, a lot of people think renewables include batteries. They don't include batteries. They said, oh, it would be great, we just have the battery. They don't include batteries in renewable if you're going to count that. So it gets confusing. And this is just one type of generation that we have, and we need that flexibility to be able to run the plants. And that's why we came with just carbon intensity. We had a huge amount of people asking for a renewable goal, most of them 100%, and I think that is not realistic. If we have a renewable goal of 100%, we're not going to have a OPPD anymore. We'd go bankrupt.
I'll disagree with you on something. I don't think it's a huge number of people.
Compared
to the
comments, of those
820,000
200
customers we
comments,
have,
you know,
or
more than half of them
customers we
were,
have.
you know, renewable, 100% renewable.
It's a voice, and I hear it.
It's a voice.
Okay.
We're hearing. And they're confused about it. So, because that was always been the mantra is, and for myself too, it used to be, yeah, I like the renewable goal and everything, but now that I've been educated, I guess, as I'm saying, I understand that the need for the flexibility with the carbon intensity.
Was that when we were at 0 renewables?
Yeah,
So
I
it
remember
was
when
an
we were at
easy-
zero and
easy-
it was hard to get 10%.
not easy, but
We're gonna have
that
10%
was
by
like the-
2020.
The cool new thing. It's not new anymore.
It was.
It's not.
It was 10 by
Well, the
2020.
technology's moved.
We've done a good
It's
job.
advanced.
It's more accepted. It's just-
And I think we should also, we should give this company kudos of what we've done and the strides that we've made in renewables and sustainability that we've worked on. A lot of other people haven't done it, and we've done it, this little company. And, you know, the big companies can sort of do that, but, you know, we've done it, you know, at some cost, some time to doing it, but we've got a thing that we've got to balance. The whole thing is a balance. Sometimes I think I have to bring one of those balances in there and put little pennies in it and explain everybody
Our
where we
system
are.
folks do that every sub-second of the day, so
Yeah, they're looking at
they're
the
very
balance.
accustomed to that.
So we have to figure out how we're going to keep, we have a fiduciary responsibility to keep this company solvent, and we have to look at that.
Keep the lights on.
And keep the lights on. Reliability, it's right there. Affordability, reliability, sustainability. We've got to figure it out.
And someday in the future, 100% renewables may be possible.
Might be.
It might be possible.
This
I don't
day
think it
it's
is
not.
today, but it may be someday.
Yeah. And we're forward-looking enough that we'll bite on it. We'll go for it
Yeah.
with 100% renewable.
So I've heard the term suboptimal a few times, and that's not something that I've heard previously. I feel like maybe we're substituting that for pace of value. Can you help me understand what suboptimal?
I can't
it's
use
not
that
pace of
anymore at
value.
these meetings, yeah.
So when you're,
Well, so Mary, so when you do the resource,
so when we're doing
planning.
resource
We're gonna
planning,
lose money.
we're taking a ton of variables and inputs into the box that we use to create the most balanced portfolio that produces a system that's reliable, that it's economical, and now that it's also environmentally sensitive. The output of that results in a portfolio that tells us, well, this is how much we're going to have in coal, in gas, wind, solar, batteries. These are the portfolios that were presented to the board about 2 years ago when the IRP was presented to the board in 2016. Those portfolios are optimal portfolios that solve for different barrels, for different goals. When one of the most important outputs of that portfolio is provided as an input. So when you're saying thou shalt have 100% renewables or 75.2% renewables and this much of energy efficiency and this much of wind, you're constraining the model, and by definition, it will result in a suboptimal solution. If instead of putting those as inputs, you leave those as outputs, and really the input for consideration is carbon intensity, customer satisfaction, reliability, rate increases, all the higher level goals that the SDs are telling us to do, then our optimization systems will deliver optimal portfolios that touch on all of those goals. That's what I mean by suboptimal.
Okay, so thank you for explaining that. I appreciate that. Is the challenge with having percent renewables as both an input and an output, is that we've been doing that previously, right? We've had a 30% target. So was that creating suboptimal outputs in some of our previous planning because we had that as a model? Or is that only because we're adding the CO2?
Here's what I would say. Here's what I would say, though, is that we made choices early in our wind conversations to begin to put our toe in the water and do some things that we wouldn't have made today, and we probably shouldn't have made then, except we saw market prices significantly higher, natural gas prices at the $8 range and all the future forecasting that never materialized. Right? So from that piece, we did force some suboptimal decisions to understand and get some of the early experiences. Now, I would say on the backside, if you think about the Grand Prairie, the Prairie Breeze, the Shoals project, that was done in the optimization of the model from an energy requirement that we needed as we shut down Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station. And as I've shared with the board in our conversations, we're going back through and begin to look at capacity and other energy needs, and we want to optimize what they may look like. And so we'll see what that work does over the course of the next several months. That we'll come back to the board and have that conversation.
What years were those early ones? Shows.
I don't know, 2005, 7, something like that, early.
What was the question?
Early wind farms.
I mean, that's a long.
Elkhorn Ridge, 15 years ago.
Flatwater, 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
So large ones started in 2011.
Yeah. But those early innovator years, you're choosing these things just to do it, and they weren't financially
It's just like community.
There wasn't significant impacts.
Extremely well done.
Yeah, it wasn't significant impacts to drive rate increases or anything like that, right? At those small little numbers, but it was us to get experience, get exposure, to really understand what it looks like on our system, in our system, integrating in our system, and kind of what that looks like. Again, the last 3 have really been to optimize our portfolio with low-cost energy, right, very clearly.
So what we put in the model as inputs, as opposed to a percent renewable, is what the cost of the technology is doing, right? And that's how it goes through and it looks at what is the optimal output. So instead of forcing it to take a renewable resource, we're putting in the cost of those resources and we're looking at those in comparison to other resources that are available to us. And so this is a balance between what our load is and what our resources are, and that's really what the model is doing. It's optimizing that based on the cost of the technology. So the input is the cost as opposed to I want an outcome that says I want 50% renewables.
Today is cost optimizing because we don't have any other way to optimize.
And resiliency optimizing, right?
Cost and resilience.
Yeah, right.
That's the balance.
That's the
Because we
balance.
don't have the third leg of the stool, which is, in this case, this carbon intensity. We haven't had it forever.
And if you think about when we were going through our planning for CPP, right? The carbon was the piece that we had to modify in the model, which then in turn would select what the optimal option was to meet that need. And whether carbon's in there or not, as far as a reducer, within recent years, wind has been the choice that the model has given us. And so it all kind of works together over time when your efficiencies come into play, when your costs come into play, and your system needs to be solved in a certain manner. So it's a good example of how 7 years ago the model wouldn't have selected it. As the technologies got better, as our position and the costs have gone down, and so as you transition to time, it's become the choice within the model.
But as Troy said, I think in absent direct direction from SD7, the Clean Power Plan gave us that direction. and it was one of the things that we reported on, we took into account.
So just for the sake of argument, I noticed there's a shift in the comments on the heels of the new report that came out on climate change. There's now a shift towards a reduction of carbon, total carbon is a percentage that's thrown out there.
Can you talk about which new report on climate change?
Help me, it's in the comments.
IPCC.
It's an IPCC.
United
report.
Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
You can only reach it at a certain time.
Yeah.
At the same time, yesterday, I think it was, they announced the Nobel Prize for Economics. It was shared by two people. One is Professor Nordhaus, or an economist, who has spent his career talking about the valuation of carbon and actually arguing for carbon pricing. I've mentioned before that some forward-leaning companies, the best in class, tend to have an internal price of carbon. If you were to run your optimization with an internal price of carbon, might that shift what your choices are?
I think you got to be really careful on tying those two together with best in class. May or may not be best in class, so don't know that. But they have an internal cost of carbon within their modeling they're doing within their system.
Yeah,
So
no basis for price. That's the problem, right? You can have an argument that even when the Clean Power Plan, we were looking at that in 2016 as we got into the decision around Fort Calhoun. Even at that time, there was a lot of debate about what should that be? How do you value that? What will a market look like? And if you look historically in the industry and you look at whether it was SOX or whether it was NOx, and there were going to be markets out there, and those markets have just gone to basically nothing. And so, you know, I don't know how to value that. I can look at what's happened historically in other markets, and what I can say is it started out high and it ended up to almost nothing.
I would say so from an economics perspective, if economics are the only driver for decision making, you have to insert economic drivers to influence decisions. So the price of carbon would be something that drives economic decisions. I would argue that a utility, an electric utility, especially one that is a public power utility, does not only respond to economic decisions. We have, of the 15 strategic directives we have, I would say only one, maybe two of them are directly economic driven. You, the board, value many other things. We value reliability, we value customer satisfaction, we value environmental stewardship. So I would argue, while recent studies, and they're awarded Nobel Prizes from a very prestigious university, by the way, I think it speaks to the market at large, right? And if you're really trying to influence decisions of the economy, it's usually economic variables that will influence the decisions. I don't think that is the case here. We could have a price of carbon here, as Mary said. What that price is would be really hard to come up with, and what that price would do to our emissions would be even harder to tackle. Why not, instead of going around putting in a price of carbon to see what that does to our emissions, why not just target those emissions directly? Why not just target that carbon intensity directly?
Well, carbon intensity does not target emissions directly, number one.
Why not?
Because it's a ratio.
it certainly does from a future perspective, right? It certainly does.
No, we've seen that the carbon emissions have dropped while the carbon intensity has gone up.
What is it? But the numerator in that ratio is emissions.
Right. So if you add more renewables, then you have a more favorable number, even as carbon goes up.
Correct.
And the reason we're emitting is because we're serving load. Right? We're not emitting for the sake of emitting, and that's one of the reasons that I mentioned at the last committee meeting that Director McGuire allowed me to speak, was that we are serving load, right? And as our load goes up, our emissions would tend to go up, and we're trying to keep those emissions low, and we're measuring those emissions based also on what load are we trying to serve, right? And if those emissions stay the same as our load is increasing, we are doing something good. We are limiting the amount of emissions that we have to do. If that carbon intensity relative to load, if that carbon intensity goes down as we're proposing here with a 20% drop, we're doing more than our fair share. We're not only accommodating the load increase with no emissions, no new emissions, we're now reducing the old emissions. And I think that's where the argument in favor of carbon intensity comes in.
I think I wanted to share the conversation that the senior management team had and what we sent to the board, just to have that conversation. And
I appreciate
the reason why I think Director
We need
McGuire said, hey, let's kind of think about this and come back with a final recommendation to the board maybe next month on this strategic directive.
And I couldn't make that meeting yesterday morning, so I do appreciate this conversation. I think it's a good conversation.
Yeah.
But this just exactly shows why we're pushing it back just a little bit. So,
Well,
but
yeah, and I
it's-
think that's right. I think we need to ruminate on it a little bit. I mean, the one thing that struck me a little bit is I'm fascinated by the language we're using on how the risk to us is it's stretching our system, it's about balancing the system, it's about striking sort of this delicate balance between affordability, reliability, environmental sensitivity, and to me it's really interesting to sort of juxtapose that with the reality of the global system that we're affecting, right? Like the balance of the human system versus the environmental system is something that is, as evidenced by yesterday's IPCC report, out of balance. There's no question about it. So it's just really interesting for me to sort of compare and contrast those two things, because we're trying to balance what we're doing as a company to serve, you're right, we have no choice but to serve the new load that's coming on. And we got to figure out a way to do that. But to me, it's also compelling that like we play a really important role in the broader system. There's no question about that either, and we have a very, very big impact on that. And so thinking about, can we do X in the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever that might be, is a valuable question to be asking. But to me, I think what's most important is that we are sort of facing that challenge right up front, which I think we are, and asking really hard questions about how we can play a proactive role in this, because it's not going away. It's not going away. So to me, whichever the right metric is, I'm not sure what the right goal is. I'm not sure, to me, the higher level objective here, if I can do anything as a board member to relay, it's that we need to drive carbon down. Period, full stop, end of story. And we need to do that while obviously balancing the system in the right way. So it's the strategic directive, like we talked about this, nobody's going to walk away saying, I got everything I wanted. And that's fine. We're compromising. We're working towards what we think is the right fit for us at this point in time. In 2 or 3 or 5 years, that might change. But ultimately, I can't help but like ignore, I can't ignore what's going on around us. And I think we're doing a really good job of sort of not fighting it, but like wrestling it and really trying to figure out what our role is in that system. And I think that's good. That's a really good conversation for us to have.
If I may, I couldn't agree more with you. I have 3 children. I have 3 little children. I want a clean environment for them. I moved to Nebraska about over a year ago. And one of the reasons I decided to move from the Pacific Northwest, where we have hydro and nuclear, was because I saw what this company was doing for the environment. If that was not the case, I personally would have not made the move. I think we're making a ton of improvements. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it's a balancing. You're talking about this world balance, national balance, regional balance. The balancing between the long-term health of planet and also the short-term health of this organization. We need to keep this planet healthy, clean, but I also need to keep providing electricity to the hospitals to keep all the people out there healthy as well, right? So it's how do we keep the system healthy? How do we keep that reliability healthy so that the economy can continue to thrive and that economy can continue to fund this transformation that we're going into? Mm-hmm. I am incredibly proud of what this organization has done in the past year and a half that I've been here. It's amazing to see the transformation. We are today producing about 33% to 34% of our retail sales come from renewables. That is fantastic. And that's something that should not be ignored.
Yeah.
And we are well on our way to
Comparison
get to 40% once the Shoals facility is online, right? We're trying to make the right decisions without necessarily breaking the system, with still providing the right incentives for people to continue to do the best work. And this is where I think senior management came up with a combined proposals. If 50% is a stretch goal, it's a good stretch goal. It's not an easy one to get there. If you give us the metric of carbon intensity, that'll help us achieve the same goal that I've heard from the board and that I've read from comments. It allows us, it's an enabler for us to go out and do that work, right? It's not necessarily battling or fighting. I think we're fighting the same fight. We're debating on which metric to use so that we can then both, all of us, win in the long term.
Yeah.
Off my soapbox.
Okay, I think that hopefully we've all in discussion here for right now, and then I think probably it would be better, I don't know where Lisa is or not, but I think I just told her that we probably need to have more public comment about the idea of 50% renewable from our stakeholders. But if we could cut it off a week ahead of time, this time, so everybody, all the directors can review the comments ahead of time, so we can hopefully make a decision in November about this and have an action, a board action item. So that, can we take a break?
Should we take a break?
Yeah, can we take a break?
Okay, let's take it.
Can we take a break?
Yep. 10 minutes.
Thanks.
We'll be back here about 10:15.
Sounds good.
15?
So I remember
Problems, headaches,
And so we're gonna go to public comment.
I remember, yeah.
Well,
Thank you, Lisa. Very good, appreciate it. Today I'm going to be walking you through some highlights of how we have brought our strategic directive team to life over the past several months. As you may have recalled, the Public Information Board Committee went through and revised SB 13. So this report is going to reflect that new language. So with that being said, the three components, while they're very broad, they do cover a lot. And so this monitoring report is going to be a little bit different because the stakeholder process is different in every aspect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So really with this strategic directive is we want to share context with customer owners for key decisions, use an integrated, clear, and transparent engagement process, and we'll just talk about some of the tools that we have in our toolbox for that. And then the bottom line is we want to continuously evaluate and improve its outreach and engagement process. Now I know the PI committee, we spent a lot of time, the board spent a lot of time choosing these words wisely. The one recommendation that we're going to have at the end is, and Scott, from a process standpoint, what we want to do is move bullet 2 up on the process and then share context from that. So hopefully you'll entertain that. So this should look really familiar to you. This was built a few years back and the board approved it, and it's a very thorough and proven process. But I will tell you, we have been following this process for the last couple years, and really the part that brings this to life are the employees and our community outreach and so forth, and a lot of the people are in this room, so we'll talk through that. So with that, I just wanted to give a highlight of, like I said, one size does not fit all in terms of our engagement. And so each outreach effort has different program objectives, and the team puts together outreach tools that will meet the needs of each of these audiences and so forth. And so really I've just got 3 here that I'll touch on a little bit, but if you'd like to, I have a deeper dive past the monitoring report if that's what you need. One of it was community solar. And the objectives were completely different than the Sarby Transmission Project or the La Vista Transmission Project. So these are case studies that I'll talk through. Here are some of the tools that we use for each of these outreach efforts. And we don't have to use them all, but the team does put that in combination. So let me give you an example. For an engagement for solar, we conducted 4 workshops with some of our key stakeholders and so forth to find out really what was on their mind and so forth. We did community outreach at Earth Day to get comments on solar and what they thought that it should be. We did qualitative research, and then we also did quantitative research to find out really what our customers were, what was on their minds. And in fact, in that research, over 600 surveys were received in that regard. So with that, as you all know, with the solar, we listened, came back, made adjustments, and came out with a rate rider because that's what the customers wanted, and then of course rolled out the community solar, which then we'll begin marketing during the next several months. We will be getting the key stakeholders back together in the December timeframe just to kind of talk through the marketing materials and so forth. So as you can tell, we check and adjust all the way along to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the stakeholders. Sarby Transmission Project, in this one, really our goal here was to contact the impacted and interested stakeholders to get their feedback on the route options. We conducted local leaders, open houses, we did research, and then as you had heard before, that was another thing that we wanted to do is it will be a 5-phased approach in terms of market research on this one, because each phase will have a different objective in terms of listening to the customers. We are through 2 phases of that. The first one, as you know, was about the open house. And 1,000 people were invited, 53 attended, and Director Yoder, we did go back and contact those people that attended to find out why they didn't attend or why they wanted to attend, and 66% of the customers were aware of the meeting but chose not to attend because they didn't care about the subject or didn't feel it affected them. 30% of the customers stated they trusted OPPD to do the right thing for their customers. Let me repeat that. 30% of the customers said, I trust OPPD. And then the 53 customers that attended the open house felt that it was a success. So the next phase is right now in the right-of-way, and then phase 3 will be starting later on in the year of land acquisition. So more to come. I'll be coming back to you and reporting out on what we heard on that one. In phase 3, what we're going to be asking is, what's your overall satisfaction with the explanation received during the acquisition, fairness of the compensation, landowners' understanding of their rights, and overall satisfaction and trust with OPPD. So let me then turn to La Vista. That was a different project that it was in partnership with the city of La Vista. And this was a outreach that really took a different tactic of some of these items here. We had multiple meetings with the city of La Vista, thanks to the leadership of Steve Fanslaw and his team. We did letters and handouts, and Lori and the team are doing a great job of putting more visuals out there so people can see it, and also flyovers, which has been, that has served us well. And then we did informational tabletops prior to the City of La Vista City Council meetings and so forth. And I will tell you, from the feedback that we've heard from the mayor and the City Council members, they're extremely pleased. And Director Gay, I don't know if there's anything that you could add to that.
Absolutely. You've done a great job. Well, the whole team reaching out.
Well, the whole team, like I said.
And I know continued follow-ups with the mayor and some of the elected officials have been excellent, so kudos to you.
So one of the items that we heard loud and clear is they wanted to make sure that the school was taken care of so that there wasn't construction taking place while the parents were dropping the kids off and so forth, and so the team accommodated that. So they did a beautiful job in that regard. So
not one complaint.
Not one, and 100% acquisition on the right-of-way. So 100%. So kudos to the team. So thank you for that. The other item, tools that we use are really what are we hearing from the voice of the customer. And I want to start off with relationships, and that's how I started this presentation. Our customers, your customers, they trust OPPD, and we have worked hard to continue that trust. And through that, we've done it through community coffees. I know the team has been out to the various communities to sit down with our customers, listen. Some of the directors have been there as well to listen through. Community events, been participating in Sorusco Days in the rural areas and so forth, and you're going to see more of that. I didn't have time to put that all into this presentation, but I'll come back to you on that, because Lori and the team have done a lot of work on that. We're actively involved in boards and organizations, and then really the one-on-one relationships. People reach out to us and tell us what's on their mind. But then we overlay it with market research. And we have customer satisfaction studies. As you know, we wait, J.D. Power comes out in waves, 4 waves and so forth, but that's looking back, right? The market research team also does once a month, actually every week, we survey 100 customers, and an outside company does that for us to find out customer satisfaction, their trust with OPPD, and our community outreach and so forth. And we score in 8.1 and above, and we have for several months. So that's pretty much real-time data that shows from a trending standpoint if we're seeing any downward trends in that regard. And then, of course, we have our online panel. Michael Leary is in charge of that. We have over 5,000 customers that are extremely engaged in all sorts of topics. And I think there's some people in the room that are on that online panel, Dr. Corbin. So, but we don't know exactly who, right? And then, of course, traditional research methods. We do a lot of focus groups. We did that with the electric vehicles and so forth, so you could have that dialogue and so forth. And same with solar. So the next point is methods we use to share context. And this, again, is one size does not fit all. So, for instance, the La Vista project, we wanted to share context with the city officials and the people impacted, that the poles and wires were in their backyards and so forth, and along the streets and so forth. So what does that look like, and what impact is that going to have on those individual homeowners, and what are their concerns? So that's setting context there. We also do, like for community solar, we did multiple wire stories and so forth, and they got 526 page views, which pushed through social media, so that helped kind of set context through that. We do a lot in social media. We have about 6,800 followers on Facebook, 10,000 on Twitter, and 7,000 in LinkedIn, which we've been, last year when I reported, we were probably about, I think, 3,000. So we've been working really hard on that. And then down below, in terms of OPPD.com, OPPD Listens, and OPPD The Wire, we have about, on OPPD.com, 886,000 page views a month on that website. 114, almost 115,000 users monthly. And then on OPPD The Wire, to year to date, there's been a 47% increase in unique page views and 71% growth in total users. So kudos to Kate Thomas and the team there, and we're going to continue to push that as well. And then, as you can see, there's other things that we've got in our toolbox.
If I can point out The Wire, it's interesting that some of the news people, the Omaha World Herald people, look at The Wire and then say, "Oh yeah, this sounds like a good story," and they call you up. So.
And actually, WWT now is sourcing that as well. Yeah. So, and that was the original plan. So, Kate and Paula Lukowski, they've done a really great job. So we're going to keep up that work. So I know that this slide is a little bit busy, but last year we heard you say, "How do you know that you're top quartile in your stakeholder outreach and so forth?" So the team has been in, below is our process. This particular methodology is from the International Association of Public Participation. And what's really great about this is there's over 1,300 participants, including organizations such as WAPA, Colorado Springs, and a lot of other industries. So the beauty of that is all of these components are pretty much in our particular methodology as all. But here really for that is, the promise to the public is inform, right here. You keep them informed, you consult. Keep you informed, listen, acknowledge concerns, and provide feedback. We do that now through OPPD Listens and our research. Involve. Work with customers to ensure concerns, issues are directly reflected in solutions and provide feedback on how to input used information, open houses, stakeholder meeting, the one-on-one meetings when Tim and Steve's teams are across the table negotiating on that. Collaborate. Look for direct advice and innovation in formulating solutions and incorporating advice to max intent possible. What we mean by that is workshops, one-on-one meetings, media contacts, and so forth. And finally, empower, which is the same as this last component here, is implement what customers decides. Again, they're represented by you as board members, and ultimately you vote on how you're going to represent the customers. So the beauty of this is it confirmed that our process is strong. However, the last component is how do you continue to improve that? And as I said, each of the stakeholder processes and plans that we put together, we have that component of where do we need to check and adjust, where do we need to improve, and so forth. And so by this time next year, we'll probably come back and show some more improvement in that. The process is strong, but this is what makes it so successful. We hear it over and over and over again about the great people and the dedication for our employees. So while I'm closing with the process chart to ensure we have the right tools of engagement and are at the top of the industry, it truly is the employees at OPPD that demonstrate every day our passion to serve, how we honor our communities, and how we care about each other. So with that, we're recommending to the Public Information Committee that they accept the monitoring report for SD13. Director McGuire.
Thank you, Lisa. Really appreciate it. I think you've done a great job. This is kudos to last year's PI committee that worked on the stakeholder process, the new process. I think it's very, very, it's excellent. Any other comments from?
I have one. Just another, again, I couldn't believe last year when they said they were going to do 2 transmission projects right in our district. I'm thinking this is going to be a sucky year. But, I mean, you've done just an outstanding job. I've been to several of the meetings they were at with La Vista and Sarpy County and the outreach. And I think the thing is, it's like you actually care what they're saying. But really, we put those are going down one of our north-south corridors that gets everybody into Omaha back and forth every day to work. right in front of a school on 72nd Street. And then the other one is in a high-growth area where we're building tons of new houses. And the pre-planning to upgrade that is actually very good, too. I'm glad we're doing it now, because in 10 years, it's going to look completely different. But anyway, with the large equipment you have to pull in and all the different work that has to be done, I've been amazed how smooth it's going, you know, knock on wood, that it continues. But not a peep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been phenomenal. And not a peep from the mayors or the council. You know, I run into them all the time. And it's been
That's
going
great.
great. So, good job. And
appreciate
I
it.
really do think you guys care what
Kudos to the team, and I
somebody
will
says
tell
something.
you, this is far-reaching across the entire district, and our teams have just come together beautifully. And as we know, communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yeah.
So-
And community solar was also a very huge project for you. And I think you did a good, very good job with that.
I'm only speaking on the few that I had to deal with
Yeah.
directly. But yeah, overall, it's been,
Overall,
I've
it's
been
been
very
good.
impressed with, over the years with the companies.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, not to suggest that your processes previously were shoddy, right? Because I think they've always been
Appreciate
good, but I think you've done a really good job of continuing to refine and improve those processes. The communicate, I think is right spot on. I think that when people, if we don't provide the information, people will fill in with whatever they want, right? So let's be the first to the table to provide that and own the message. I think you do a really good job of that. To me, what's really important is that we continue to, as we go through these processes, there's the check and adjust is really about what adjustments can we make, what are we hearing from people, what can we do? But I also think it's, and we're doing this is circling back to people and getting their input on how they felt the process went, right?
Right.
I think that's one of the things that's really important to me is to ensure that we're getting feedback from people who have gone through it, even if they're disengaged, even if they don't care, right? Knowing why they don't care and why they're stepping away is really helpful for us to ensure that we improve these processes going forward. So kudos for doing that work. I think that's really, really important, and it will continue to help us refine and improve our processes going forward.
Appreciate that.
And I think Michael's here, he's the one who does a lot of that marketing for us to get the people's feedback. Thank you very much.
Voice of the
for your work.
customer, too.
Yep, he listens to those customers, without a doubt. Now, what changes exactly did you want to make as far as this, as far as the recommendation?
We just
As
want to
far as-
move the,
We're just going to say it's in compliance, and then we can change what now?
so just take your first bullet, move it to the second one, and put the process first. And
Process
then
first.
provide context would be second.
Okay, has everyone agreed with that? I don't think we need to take that out to, is that okay, Scott? We can just go ahead and,
It just makes everything flow better in terms of when we report out, since this is a new report.
right. Okay, if there's no other comments,
Thank you.
then we'll vote on that with consensus on Thursday. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Next up is systems management, Rick.
Yeah, thank you. We'll start out with contracts over 500,000, and Javier, can you take the first and third ones? One's a maintenance item, and the other is a recurring request, I guess.
Yes, glad to do that. The first one is the refurbishment of a dozer, a coal handling dozer. We have two of these units on each one of our stations. Very, very important for the production, generation of energy, moving coal, managing coal piles. This specific unit has come to the end of life, and the team looked at either replacing it with a completely brand new unit, or doing a refurbishment. And for many reasons, the refurbishment turned out to be the most economical solution. And we have done this type of refurbishments before for similar units, so we've tested it and we know it works well. So the contract here is for $614,700 to do the refurbishment of these dozer.
And the Systems Committee met on the 4th and had a good back and forth on this one. Any questions, comments on that?
Okay. The third one is a capacity contract for the Western Area Power Administration, WAPA. This is a 30-year contract that we've had in place for 30 years. It's coming up for renewal, and this is a contract where we get energy and capacity from the Western Area Power Administration. mainly because of our ties with with another federal agency here, the Offutt Air Force Base. It is, in my opinion, a great contract. Prices were at or below some of our most competitive capacity and energy prices. It's a 30-year contract. There are termination clauses. We can always terminate if prices change. But as of today, it's a very favorable contract. So the total value for the contract is $9 million, which is what you have on the sheet. The annualized value, the estimated annualized value is about $300,000 for that.
That's all hydro, correct?
Mostly hydro.
Most of it's hydro?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments on that? I'd just like to say that I didn't realize that it was due to the Strategic Air Command or Offutt that we have that available to us, and it's a really sweet contract in terms of source of power, and it's outstanding. Yep. Mary, can you help us with the second item?
I can. This is a contract for software licensing and maintenance through ABB. We have an existing contract that goes through 12/31 of 19, but as we've upgraded our systems over the course of the year, the board has approved those projects over the course of the year. What we're doing is canceling that contract and then reissuing it to include the additional units that now have this software. And so it will be to cover excuse me, the units at Nebraska City 1, North Omaha 1 through 5, Sarpy County 1 through 5, and Jones Streets 1 and 2. So we're expanding the contract. The contract is for $595,000, a little bit more, over the course of 3 years to provide this maintenance and services to us.
Thank you. Well, appreciate that, Mary.
Thank you.
Troy, can you tell us a little bit about the SDP?
Right. So we mentioned the Sarpy transmission project a little while ago. As a reminder, that's a 6.5-mile project that's there to take place or to support the growth that we're seeing in that area of our service territory. And this action item relates to the procurement of the steel structures or poles needed for that construction. And so what we do is we try to get these in place, and sometime next summer up and through the end of next year, we would want to put these structures in place for the line. What we did is we went out for an RFP. We had that was around August time period. We had 3 respondents, and after our employees and legal counsel reviewed those, we found that we had challenges with each of the 3 RFP responses. One was legally non-responsive. There were a number of issues with that particular response. One was technically non-responsive, and really it was technically non-responsive because there needs to be some additional clarification around the timing and the guarantees of delivery. So not huge, but still not technically responsive. And the third was more of a fair market value concern that we had, where the price came in 40% over the engineer's estimate, so significantly different. Back to the one that was technically non-responsive, it actually came in spot on to what our engineer's estimates, so there was some pretty big differences in price there. What we're requesting at this point is for the board to reject all 3 and allow us and our team to negotiate directly with the entity that was technically non-responsive with the price that was in line with our engineering estimates. And we feel very comfortable with this entity. They're one of the largest suppliers of this type of structure in the United States. We've worked with them before, so we know they have the capability and the wherewithal to meet the challenging deadlines we have to have everything in service by the end of next year. And so with that, we'll turn it over for any questions.
Troy, would you be able to go back and negotiate with each of the 3? If we can just negotiate with the one vendor, are our hands kind of tied because they're going to know they're the only game?
So there's a couple things to consider here. We had certain specs that we had set forth, and then
were they pretty specific as far as, or unique as far as why there weren't more suitable bids? I mean, this should be a relatively common contract, right?
Well, these are kind of unique poles, so when we develop them, we optimize them for the area, and some poles are taller than others, so it's really fit for our system, to optimize our system.
You know, and I think the intent here is that we would negotiate, but if we don't conclude successful negotiations with the first bidder, we would move to the other bidders to do that. So we're just not focused in on one bidder at this. We are going to negotiate. If we can get the price and the timeline and the details around that, then we would conclude that and move forward as quickly as we can. But if we can't get substantial completion on the dates and the time, then we would move to the second vendor to look at negotiating. So I don't think it puts us in an adverse negotiating position at all.
No, and again, we have a lot of experience with this vendor, and they've shown the capability in the past, so we're not really concerned about that.
Can we say the name of the bidder, or do we have to say the first bidder? I don't know what's public.
It's attached on the sheet here. The three bidders are. We should be able to say.
Okay, I thought so. I didn't know why we were being evasive about that. So Valmont's proposal there were several things that sort of rendered it technically non-responsive. We've got a laundry list of things.
Right.
I'm just assuming that we're comfortable that those things are overcomeable in the negotiations. None of them are so significant that they're deal breakers.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
I think, as I read it, one of the real hurdles was delivery dates, and they had put in something saying, we'll deliver X number of weeks after calcs are approved.
Right.
They've got a lot of experience in people slow-walking, engineers slow-walking those approvals, and then getting angry when they don't get their product on time. They're just saying, hey, you've got to play
Which
right
is
with
completely
us.
reasonable.
Yeah,
right?
and they just have that going on all the time. So, and these are big structures. There aren't, the bigger the structures go, the fewer the vendors that are available to build them, because you need really big equipment to do this stuff and really big galvanizing facilities. So that kind of narrows the number of people eligible to even bid on this.
Out of curiosity, are most of these steel structures made in the United States, or are they made someplace else?
So,
yes.
Yes. So it could be China, it could be Mexico, it could be the United States. It depends on the individual that you're working with and where their facilities are located.
You might have trouble if it's China. It might be increased. Hurry up with that tariff situation. Hurry up and get that contract down before.
This would not be through China.
Good.
And as hot as the economy is, steel procurement becomes an issue also.
Sure.
Because this will be specific sizes of plate, which limits the number of mills that you can go to, and there's long lead times on some of this stuff. So,
Sound like you know what you're talking about.
I wonder why.
That's right. You'll be able to negotiate this out. This isn't a problem.
Thank you for your questions. Others for Troy? Great, so that's an action item. It'll be in the consent agenda on Thursday night. The other action item is over to Mary again. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We are asking for the board to approve awarding the contract to Grenwold Mechanical Contractors and Engineers in the amount of $1,060,612 for the purchase and installation of underground piping in the coal handling area of Nebraska City. The piping that has been there, the surface water coming from the plant out to the coal handling facilities, has been underground for about 40 years and has seen significant corrosion. It had cathodic protection on it, and that cathodic protection has failed, and the corrosion has gotten extensive. We're recommending that we replace that with polyethylene piping, so we do not need cathodic protection on that going forward. However, we also have a fire protection system that's underground that still has its cathodic protection. So this project looks at not only replacing the surface water with polyethylene pipe, but also reestablishing the cathodic protection on our fire water piping as well. We've been seeing more corrosion on our fire water piping, so it's timely that we get this taken care of currently. I know as we went through the meeting, the subcommittee meeting prior to today, there was a question about the diameter of pipe that's being replaced. And I will say it's variable. It goes from 4 inches, about 2,000 feet of 4-inch pipe, up to 20 inches, about 325 feet of pipe, for a total of over a range of 4 to 20 inches of over 10,000 feet of piping that will be replaced.
And this is fire suppression.
It's fire suppression, it's service water, it's trestle water, it's going out to the coal handling facilities, providing all of the water into those facilities,
So
whether
it's-
that be through fire protection or through service water.
So it's pressurized all the time?
Yes.
Okay.
So HDPE, they're welding that out in the field, right? Is that?
I do have some information on that.
Being on the polyethylene?
High-density polyethylene?
Yeah, they'll fuse it.
I think it's
Yeah, they'll
fused.
fuse it in the field.
It'll be fused, yes.
Yeah, they'll fuse it as they do the connections.
Correct.
Were you surprised to only get the one bid?
I'm sorry?
Were you surprised to only receive the one bid?
Yeah, I think a little bit, although we're not really sure why the others, they did come to the meeting, they did walk down the area. We thought that there would be bids coming in from other vendors, but at the end of the day, there was only one that did reply.
Yeah, when I've talked to Mark Doyle at MUD, they're having difficulty getting contractors as well for all the work that they're doing on their main replacement program, so this probably doesn't surprise me.
It's a hot
Terrific.
economy.
Other questions? So, yeah, go ahead.
In Mr. Bruckner's note, he said there's no schedule information requested in the proposal. I assume we're okay with this, from a scheduling standpoint, where there are no issues?
We'll have to look at our schedule and how we can take those pieces out of service, and so it's something that we'll work out with the vendor.
Okay, great. Good.
Okay, so again, that'll be on Thursday night as part of the consent action items. And, thank you. Systems Committee concludes its report.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Rick. And governance, Tim?
We're going to have 2 strategic directives to discuss. Mark's going to discuss one, and then Kate's going to discuss another on information management security. So I'll turn it over to Mark. She's going to discuss ethics monitoring report in our code of ethics. You got a presentation you're going to give, Mark? Yes. And then we have also 2 items that's going to be on the closed session, all right? And I think we're last, so we'll go right into closed session after this.
Good.
And these are both going to be on the agenda on Thursday, so.
Both these first items are the closed session
Yep.
items. Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
SD 10 on ethics requires that the board adopt an update as necessary a code of ethics and business conduct, and that OPPD shall also maintain and enforce a code of conduct applicable to all employees. There are 4 specific requirements that we will cover on the next few pages, and they are listed there. The first is that we require high ethical standards in all aspects of official conduct. So for the board of directors, those are outlined in loyalty, compliance with applicable laws, and observance of ethical standards. For employees, they're listed as integrity, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, and acting in a legal and ethical manner. Those codes of conduct establish clear guidelines for ethical standards and conduct, and those specific items that are addressed in both the board code of conduct and the employees code of conduct are listed there. The directive does require disclosure and reporting of potential conflicts of interest. For the board of directors, conflicts of interest are enforced by the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission. Formal complaints can be filed directly with the commission. They will investigate, hold hearings as necessary, and determine appropriate action. For employees, we do an annual conflict of interest questionnaire that we send to our exempt employees. They complete those, and anything and everything that they report, we investigate and resolve. We do also have in the policy that they may notify their supervisor, manager, or human capital at any point in time, and we have some other reporting mechanisms I'll talk about in just a minute. So We want to make sure that we're providing a process for reporting violations, investigating those, and providing an annual report to the board. For the board of directors, the process is kind of listed there, that we would communicate violations to the chair of the governance committee. Those would be investigated either by the governance committee or the person that they designate, such as legal counsel. Appropriate actions will be taken and it will be reported annually to the board. There have been no violations reported in the last 12-month period. For employees, they have several options. They can report anonymously through a third-party vendor that we use, Ethics Point. They can do that online. We also allow them to report through the Employee Concerns Program at Fort Calhoun Station. You report through Human Capital. And then those are all investigated by the appropriate party or parties. Appropriate actions are taken, and there is an annual report to the board, which is usually made in the October-November timeframe. We had 6 reported violations that were related to code of conduct in the previous 12-month period, and they were all investigated and appropriate action was taken. So the recommendation is that the governance committee has reviewed and accepted the monitoring report and recommends that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with policy SD10. And I'll take any questions.
You know, I recommend that we vote for this. That's fine, but I think we need to do some major changes as far as the code of conduct and business conduct. You know, the little extra thing as far as the district board of directors. There's really no description of code of conduct or expectations of code of conduct for the directors. There's nothing in there as far as harassment, inappropriate racial, sexist remarks, you know, anything like that. I think we need to go back and look at that and add it. It's not specific enough.
So what is help me understand what the history of the code of conduct is. When was that created? How frequently is it reviewed?
Well, it was just last couple of years ago, and then a lot of people took out the remarks. We were sort of copying from what the employees were. Okay. And they, for some reason, the directors, you know, I was not really agreeing with that. I wasn't on the governance committee then. They took out the idea as far as the harassment and that type of thing. It's not even mentioned in here if you look at the code of conduct. Yeah, I read it. It's mainly as other employees. There's nothing about the behavior of the actual directors. And I think there has to be something as far as harassment or inappropriate behavior in there for the directors.
Yeah, and I don't remember any harassment discussion on that, but I do remember a discussion about should the NADC be responsible, which is the legal responsibility we all have to live within as our guide, but I don't remember the harassment part of it.
No, I'm talking about what this is from. We were talking not only about the NADC, but we were talking about as far as the code of conduct that the employees at OPPD have and how we should have some of those same code of conduct.
Okay. Well, if we want to have that discussion, I think we should. This is just for the last year. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of history on that then, as Ann said, was
we need to go forward and look at this.
Tweak it a little bit. There are no changes from that to this. If we want to look at it, more than happy to. Yeah. We should call a meeting and discuss anything you want to discuss on that. Yeah. But as of now, I think we have pretty good methods in place.
I think the method is fine as far as reporting method. Yeah. But it doesn't, nothing in this director's code of conduct talks about the actual director's conduct.
So I think in our SD conversation, what we would do is ask the board to provide any comments that they have regarding this SD. Committee would get together, vet it out, come back with recommended changes, but we would move forward on Thursday with the approval of this.
Right. Yeah, so
that could be a long discussion.
Let's decouple those things, right? Because we got two questions.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? So let's focus on whether or not we're compliant.
Yep.
Which we are.
Well, let me ask a couple questions on that. Sure. I think we are too, but I just want to get some clarity. So, Martha, the 6 reported incidents, did you say you report to us what those were at some point later?
Yes, they're normally reported to the board in the October-November timeframe, and we've had some changes of how we're organized here in the organization, and so we're getting that ready to report.
Okay, and just curious,
those... This is reported to the Finance, Insurance, and Audit, so we did that last year, and we're prepared to do these employees in a couple of days.
Yeah,
through
is that
Scott
Thursday?
Forge's organization.
Cool,
And
okay.
why is that finance versus governance?
Audit.
Because
Oh, it's part of the audit? Okay,
Finance, insurance, and audit.
okay.
Okay, so I'll learn more about those
Yes.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay. To the code. Okay, that's all I had.
Well, I had a question. See, last year we had, in this arena, on this subject, we had a suggested change in language that I thought we moved forward with, but I don't see it. So help me with my memory. The loyalty discussion, you know, we talked about best interest to the company versus best interest to customers as well, the customer owners. And I thought we ended up saying, having an and rather than stop after the company. Nobody else remembers that?
I do remember this discussion. Let me go back, if you would, Director Yoder, and take a look through the notes to make sure that it is up.
Yeah, because I just don't see it in the document now.
I appreciate that. I need to go back and take a look.
Thank you.
I remember the discussion, but I don't remember any,
Loyalty
that there was
right here.
enough interest to have an action on that.
Could be, yeah.
However, if we're gonna go and do this next year, since it's already October and we're looking at November, we're gonna have new leadership in a year. I would suggest we do that with new leadership in place than to start something, because the governance committee is gonna be different next year.
Yeah.
So we're gonna start something for a month and
Well,
then
I actually
change
think
it all around. I
that we
think
should
we should
change the
wait
code of
till.
ethics right away. I actually think the code, as far as my
Well, we can get
comments on
started.
that, should be
What I'm
done.
saying, I don't think
I
there
don't
should be
wanna
anything
delay
until we
that.
get.
Let's collect feedback and
Yeah,
then.
we get to do
Yep.
this. So on this one, I think what we seek is it's approved. We'll have an initial discussion and see where we're at. We can bring up the loyalty thing too, because I've been with you on that a little bit back and forth. What does that mean? Whatever. So we just have a good discussion on that. So.
And you'll check to see history. Great.
Yeah, we'll get back. Anything else? Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Huh?
All right, and Kate
Oh, yeah.
has a
We are, yeah.
presentation also, then you're gonna bring up some cybersecurity issues in closed sessions.
Yeah, but we gotta do this.
Hi, Kate.
Good morning.
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 Save the best SD for last is what I like.
Hey, let's give her an applause, okay. We're still awake.
Well, this is going to wake you up even more. So. Okay. So, monitoring report for SD12. So this is information management and security. As Director Gay mentioned, we're doing very similar to what we did last year. I'll go through the monitoring report, and then Joshua Mauk has joined us, and he will do the deeper dive within the closed session. So information management and security. Basically, overall, what this says is that we're protecting the information that we hold as assets within this organization. We protect our customers' data or their privacy. And then we manage records in an efficient way that also meets the standards from a legal and compliance perspective, which then directly ties to compliance around how we legally look at the contracts that we have and the systems that we maintain for that. So we broke this up into two components here. So in 2018, we had some new initiatives and controls that we put in place, and then we have the ongoing controls. So we kind of laid it out in this fashion. So from an information security perspective, this is around how we protect this data. So in 2018, we focused on establishing our leadership in this area and then also bring new talent into the group. And this goes outside of what we did specifically from a cyber perspective. When you look at talent, you also need the talent in the other parts of the organization, because this is like it takes a village kind of thing to do this type of activity. So you have to train and provide that talent in the other areas. So it's far-reaching from that aspect. Focused on awareness. So think about email phishing campaigns. That was really our focus. So that's a very important piece in a puzzle. So additionally, we did a lot around awareness from on-stories that we published. We sent folks out to safety meetings to talk in those meetings around security. Security and safety tie very closely together. You can think about some of the components of physical safety and security and how those tie together. We had a roadmap that you all saw last year. We've been executing on that around data security, around our network and vulnerability management, as well as around incident management. So how you respond to an incident is equally important. So, you know, it used to be people talked about if it happens, now people talk about when it happens. So it's really around how we're responding to those incidents. So we do different types of activities there, from doing things internally from a tabletop exercise to engaging with others in the community or beyond to work through an incident process. And then around security governance and processes, this is something I think I'm really proud of in terms of how we're collaborating with others in the organization and they're collaborating with us versus working within a vertical or a silo. It's bringing everyone together because this ties to the awareness, and how we work together is key in terms of protecting this organization. And I think the teams are doing phenomenal work here. So then around ongoing controls. So basically looking at our monitoring systems, how are those functioning? What are those doing? How do we enhance them? What do we do in this regard? Identifying and looking at our vulnerabilities, and what do we do to mitigate those across the organization? Situational awareness, I touched on that in terms of our incident capabilities and just lifting the overall awareness in the organization. What activities do we do to do that? How do we keep getting better at that so we continue to walk down that path? Leveraging partnerships to collect information out there. There's a lot of information, it's growing, and we're collecting that to understand from a profile perspective, what does that look like for risk for us? Partnerships, we've got many partnerships that we are working with. You can talk about the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, LPPC, APPA. There's a whole slew of areas that we work with other folks on this topic. It's a very community organization around the topic of cyber. Incident response, maintaining procedures and technologies that allow us to detect and analyze what's going on out there, and looking at our operations through a cybersecurity lens and looking at events that are happening out there. Incident response exercises that I mentioned just a little bit ago, that's all part of this. And then this integration of physical and cybersecurity, this is huge. Other organizations are looking at this. We did this about 2 years ago. And there's all different sorts of components that come into play here. And you can even walk further. So building services that reports up through our business unit as well. That is becoming more and more of a tie as well, because you think of the electronics that start to run buildings and how does that work. It's all becoming so integrated and interconnected that bringing this all together is a really good way of looking at security in our organization. Moving on to customer privacy. So the objective around this is to keep our customer information private. How do we do that? So in 2018, we looked at compliance and the changing state around us in terms of laws that are going on out there. You can think about the GDPR, which was the European Union information that was brought into our organization. Look at that, how we have to interplay with that. There's things going on in other states that we watch to understand, because eventually those might come to our state. So this is all around things of that nature. And then in terms of email communication practices, putting in place more monitoring so we can protect that customer data. The ongoing controls, this is around access to customer information. Our employees that have access to that, they go through training to ensure that they understand how to secure that data and how they can or cannot share that information. They are trained on red flags. This is around early identification of identity theft type information. This is very important. This is part of the FACT Act. And then management reviews information around identity theft prevention program. This is an annual process, and we look at how effective we're being and where we might need to make changes.
Can you go back one second?
I sure can.
So I'm going back to the objective. We will ensure that the third party has information practices to protect sensitive and confidential information. How are we ensuring that those third parties are actually doing that?
Very much through contractual.
Okay.
We inject that into the contracts. And we keep that. You also have to maintain that. That's not a one and done, because it's an ever-evolving way of looking at that. So we work very closely with supply chain management. They're very supportive of this. And we work to put that into those contracts.
Okay.
And keeping good partnership relationships with the people we're working with is also a piece of this.
We also do it on the customer side for third-party entities that are helping customers. There's a non-disclosure agreement, and the customer has to sign an authorization to, or consent to allow us to provide that information to a third party.
So would the NEST program fall under that umbrella?
Well, that one would be in the contractual.
Okay.
And I'm in the service agreement with the customer. It's saying that they're
Right. Okay, that's right.
It would all tie together from the
Right.
contractual side on both of these. Thanks, Julie.
This would be more like if there was a third-party bill payer for a customer and we're providing them billing and usage information.
Okay.
Or the assistance agencies that, you know, we're sharing information back and forth. There's a non-disclosure agreement that they sign, that they're also enforcing that upon their employees. They're handling the information.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Do you, maybe it's later, but do you have a process if there is a breach? Hopefully the third party would tell you immediately as how you would disseminate that information. Do you have something in line about how that would be disseminated as quickly as possible as far as any breach?
So that would fall on the incident management side of it in terms of we would understand what had happened and then things would flow from there. So yes, that is a piece in our process.
Okay.
Any other? So records management, so we need to maintain our records in a systematic manner and be efficient in that. So this is from kind of birth of a record to destruction of a record, so it runs the full gamut. So in 2018, we completed a pilot project within our business unit. We wanted to look at how we would implement an updated records retention process or document. So we took our business unit, did a pilot program to understand what that would look like. We have all these learnings from how to do that. A lot of changes in terms of how you manage records. You think of different technologies, different processes, so all that got took into play. And then we plan to expand on this as we come into 19 and 20 to come across the organization and take our learnings and move through that process to add the governance that we've learned in terms of this. So then from an ongoing controls perspective, so we oversee and ensure that these records are managed by folks that are trained on this. So they attend training regularly so they know how to archive, maintain, and destroy records appropriately. We leverage our internal and external partnerships, so, or industry partnerships. So this could be, we work with NPPD, we work with the state of Nebraska, there's other folks that we work with around this to stay current on this. And then we do have a formal records management program that we support at Fort Calhoun and the decommissioning process that they're going through.
Okay, records, just to, records, are we defining that as a physical record? Or
Physical, electronic, it's anything that would come under the definition of a record, doesn't matter the media that it comes
Got it. And then do we, in terms of the physical records, do we store all of those on site, or do we have third-party vendors at which we store physical records?
We store. Thank you. I like to move around, so this is hard to stay here. We do on-site record storage in different facilities that we have.
Okay, got it.
So even all the way back to, how far back do these records go?
They go.
And if they go, I
very
mean,
far back.
you really do on-site? I thought there used to be some off-site record management.
There is a component, we moved many of the records back on-site because we found that we had a more efficient process for managing those records. There was a cost piece, and we were ensuring that we had a process to access them 24/7 was the other piece of this. There were some cumbersome pieces around that. So we did bring the majority of the records back
Because I thought there was a
on-site.
history that it was
There was off-site,
Off-site.
and then we did bring back on-site the majority of those, and then they are retained electronically outside of the physical components to Director Moody's comment. Any other questions on that? From the ongoing controls, so business technology oversees and ensures these records are maintained. We leverage industry partnerships, sorry, and I'm repeating this, I already did all that, sorry. The objective around compliance. So this relates to our legal requirements and how we manage this information using technical control, system audits, and legal review. So the controls that are in place, we leverage general counsel on a regular basis to stay abreast of topics in this area. We use third-party security and privacy measures included in the contracting process, to the point that was made just shortly ago. And then we do internal and external audits and reviews to make sure that we are following our own process, and what we find and identify, we take action on. So with that, the recommendation is that the Governance Committee has reviewed and accepted this monitoring report for SD12 and finds that OPPD is taking reasonable and appropriate measures to comply with Board Policy SD12. Any other questions that I can answer?
I've got one, Kate, and maybe it's Lisa and Julie would be.
Okay.
So this is more internal controls, what we're doing, of course, but maybe every month, I might be exaggerating, we send out something, hey, somebody's trying to call, using OPPD as trying to get to our ratepayers information. Is that covered in a different SD, or how do we, are we monitoring that, or how do you all react to it?
So it's kind of, we monitor under the FACT Act is where we lump that. That's the fair and accurate credit transaction. So we log when a customer calls in and says, hey, a scammer contacted us. In the call center, there's a process where we log those. And so we monitor and we look at how they're billed. You know, is it paperless, is it electronic? So we do some analysis to make sure that there aren't any trends that would indicate something was breached. It's typically, you know, non-continental U.S. type callers. It shows that it's from OPPD,
right.
But lots of times they have an accent. And they're very compelling.
Hey, I have an accent too.
They're very compelling. I can say my husband fell for one. And I'm like, did you not ask them to ask if you could call your wife and see if you really owed the money or not? So, but that, I'm just saying that's how compelling it is when they call. They'll call businesses, they call consumers, and they really make it sound, it's high pressure, you gotta do it now, or we're gonna come disconnect your power. And they catch businesses, you know, at a busy time, and oftentimes you have multiple people that aren't sure if it's been paid or not. And so it's easier to fall for it. Anyway.
And I will say the media has been following us a lot more.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm not suggesting we try to police all these things, because it's impossible, I get it. I just wondered how we handle that.
Yeah.
And shouldn't be in here probably, because we can't control that. I just wondered what the process was.
And I can share with you
do a good job,
how many we had in a
I see it all
year's
the
time. And if a customer does pay, then we follow the FACT Act, where we send them a letter that tells them that they should report it to the Federal Trade Commission.
Yep.
And check with the credit reporting agencies to make sure that their identity is being protected.
So that's a good thing.
Right.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay, this may be a question for closed session, which is punted if you need to, but I'm curious about, I know the phishing tests that you've been doing have been a big priority. I'm just kind of curious to understand how those have been going.
That will be in the closed session. Thank you for that question.
All right. So we're good on this SD, and then I think we're going to vote on this on Thursday. It'll be on the agenda. Thanks. And
Thank
then,
you.
are we ready to go?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. I move that the board go into a closed session at this time, which is 11:15 a.m. to discuss corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters relating to the reviews of Mary Fisher, Vice President of Energy Production and Nuclear Decommissioning, and Mark Sedke, Vice President, Human Capital, to provide a briefing on OPPD cybersecurity and to discuss decommissioning planning details at Fort Calhoun Station. With respect to the two corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters, closed session is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputation of the individuals involved, and neither corporate officer has requested a public meeting. With respect to the cybersecurity issue, a closed session is necessary to obtain a confidential briefing on threats to the district systems and protective measures and strategies to protect against such threats. This information pertains to the protection of the security of public property and may include vulnerability assessments or specific unique response plans which are intended to prevent or mitigate criminal acts, the public disclosure of which would create a substantial likelihood of endangering public safety or property. The cybersecurity discussion will also address computer and communication network scheme and public utility infrastructure specifications, the public disclosure which would create a substantial likelihood of endangering public safety or property. And with respect to the Fort Calhoun decommissioning planning, a closed session is necessary to evaluate the legal and regulatory matters that are protected by the attorney-client privilege and to evaluate competitively sensitive decommissioning planning details that would create a competitive disadvantage to the district if known by potential vendors for decommissioning work.
Can you repeat that, please?
Wow. Steve, that covers it, Steve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second.
Barrett?
Christie?
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Gay?
Yes.
McGuire?
Yes.
Nye?
Yes.
Moody?
Yes.
Trinan?
Yes.
Yoder?
Yes.
Okay, the motion to go into closed session is passed. The closed session will be limited to 2 corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters, a cybersecurity briefing, and the discussion of competitively sensitive decommissioning planning at Fort Calhoun Station. No votes or board actions will be taken during the closed session. We'll take a short break here for lunch. I'll come back in and get going, okay?